The darkness of Fallout New Vegas to fall asleep to. You wake up in a shallow grave with a bullet in your head and no memory of how you got there. The man standing over you wears a checkered suit and speaks with theatrical courtesy as he explains that you were supposed to stay dead. He pulled the trigger himself, watched you drop, and left you buried in the Mojave sand with a poker chip in your pocket that you were never meant to deliver, but you survived. And now you're crawling out of that grave into a wasteland where everyone wants something from you, and nobody cares whether you live long enough to deliver it. This is where Fallout New Vegas begins. Not with heroic destiny or chosen one mythology, but with you as a loose end that needs tying up. A courier who became a problem the moment you agreed to carry the wrong package. Over the next several hours, we're going to explore every dark corner of the Mojave, the factions fighting for control of a city that's already dead, meet the people who've been broken by the desert and the radiation and the endless grinding violence, and understand why New Vegas is the darkest entry in the entire Fallout franchise. By the end, you'll see that the real horror isn't the mutants, or the raiders, or even the nuclear apocalypse that destroyed civilization. The real horror is what people do to each other when all the old rules stop applying and power becomes the only currency that matters. If this kind of deep exploration into gaming's darkest narratives is your kind of content, hit that like button to help other horror and lore fans discover this video. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love seeing our late night community checking in from all over the world. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin our journey through the desert shadows. The idea you need to carry through this entire story is simple. New Vegas doesn't hide its darkness behind monsters or supernatural evil. It shows you what humans become when civilization collapses and survival requires abandoning everything that made you human in the first place. Chapter 1. The Bullet That Started Everything. The Mojave Wasteland stretches out in every direction 200 years after the bombs fell, and somehow it looks worse than the day the missiles landed. The desert was always hostile, always ready to kill anything that couldn't adapt to its heat and its emptiness. But the Great War added layers of horror that nature never managed on its own. Radiation pools and craters where nothing will grow for another 1,000 years. Mutated creatures hunt in packs, their bodies twisted by fallout into forms that shouldn't be able to survive but do anyway. And scattered across the sand are the ruins of the old world, casinos and gas station and suburban homes, all of them monuments to the civilization that thought it was too advanced to destroy itself. You don't remember any of this when you first wake up. The grave you've been buried in is shallow enough that you can dig your way out, but deep enough that whoever put you there expected you to stay. The town of Good Springs is nearby, close enough that a robot named Victor found you and dragged you to Doc Mitchell's house before you bled out completely. Mitchell is a doctor, and he's seen enough trauma in his years treating wastelanders that a courier with a gunshot wound to the head barely registers as unusual. He digs the bullet out of your skull, stitches you up, and runs you through some basic cognitive tests to make sure your brain is still working in roughly the right order. The bullet did damage, that much is clear from the migraines, the occasional memory gaps, the way certain thoughts feel slippery and hard to hold on to, but you're functional, which in the Mojave counts as lucky. Mitchell gives you some supplies, points you toward Prim, where the package you were carrying was supposed to go, and wishes you luck. He doesn't ask too many questions about who shot you or why. In the wasteland, everyone has a story they'd rather not tell, and prying into other people's business is a good way to end up in your own shallow grave. The package you were carrying is gone. So is the poker chip that was inside it, a unique pre-war artifact made of platinum and inscribed with the number 38. You were hired by the Mojave Express to deliver it to the New Vegas Strip, to a man named Robert House who runs a city from the top of the Lucky 38 casino. But you never made it. A man named Benny intercepted you on the road to New Vegas, took the chip, put a bullet in your head, and left you for dead in a cemetery outside Good Springs. Benny runs a casino called the Tops. He's a member of a tribe that House recruited years ago, gave them the casino to manage, and elevated them from wasteland savages to something resembling civilized businessmen. But Benny isn't satisfied with being House's employee. He wants control of New Vegas for himself, wants the power that comes with owning a city in a wasteland where cities are rarer than clean water. The platinum chip is the key to that power, and when Benny learned you were carrying it, he decided that killing one courier was a reasonable price to pay for independence from House's control. You should be dead. The bullet's placement was precise, the kind of shot that drops people instantly and keeps them down. But something about your skull's thickness, or the bullet's angle, or just pure wasteland luck meant you survived long enough for Victor to find you. Now you're alive, angry, and carrying a grudge across the Mojave toward a man who has no idea his execution didn't take. This is how revenge stories start in the wasteland, not with noble purpose or righteous cause, but with one person deciding that dying would be easier than living with what someone else did to them, so they'll make that someone else die first. The road to New Vegas cuts through territory claimed by half a dozen factions, each one at war with the others in ways that range from cold standoff to open slaughter. The new California Republic holds the dam that provides power to the region and most of the territory west of the Colorado River. Caesar's Legion controls the east, a slave-holding military dictatorship modeled after ancient Rome that crucifies anyone who resists and absorbs entire tribes into its army. Raiders and gangs occupy the spaces between, preying on travelers and trading caravans. And in the middle of it all sits New Vegas, the strip where the lights still work and the casinos still run, protected by an army of robots loyal to Robert House. Everyone wants that city. The NCR wants it because controlling Vegas means controlling the dam and the electricity it generates. The Legion wants it because Caesar sees Vegas as the ultimate symbol of old world decadence that needs to be destroyed or conquered to prove his new empire's supremacy. And House wants to keep it because he spent 200 years preparing to rebuild civilization on his terms, and he's not about to let soldiers or savages take it from him now. You're walking into the middle of that war with a hole in your head and a stolen package as your only leverage. The Mojave doesn't care about your suffering or your story, just keeps turning, grinding people into dust, and waiting to see whether you'll be strong enough to survive what comes next, or whether you'll join the thousands of other corpses decorating the desert. This is the darkness that defines New Vegas, not supernatural evil, not monsters from beyond understanding, but the cold mathematical violence of human beings who've decided that their survival matters more than anyone else's humanity. Keep that in mind as we move forward, because every faction, every character, every choice you'll encounter in this wasteland is built on that same foundation, and the game will make you complicit in that darkness whether you want to be or not. Chapter 2, Good Springs and the Price of Community. Good Springs is dying, not quickly, not dramatically, just the slow decay that happens to towns when there aren't enough young people to replace the old ones and not enough resources to attract new settlers. The population hovers around a dozen permanent residents, each one clinging to this particular patch of desert because leaving would mean admitting they've wasted years of their life in a place with no future. They have a saloon, a general store, a schoolhouse that hasn't seen students in years, and a cemetery that keeps growing while the town keeps shrinking. You meet these people while you're recovering from the bullet wound. Trudy runs the saloon and serves as the town's unofficial leader, the person everyone turns to when decisions need making. Chet operates the general store and carries a grudge against Trudy that's simmered for years over some slight neither one remembers clearly anymore. Easy Pete is an old prospector who knows more about explosives than anyone has a right to know and spends his days sitting outside the saloon watching the desert. Sunny Smiles teaches newcomers how to survive in the wasteland, though she hasn't had a student in months. These are good people, or as good as anyone gets, in a world where violence is currency and mercy is a luxury most can't afford. They pulled you out of a grave, patched your wounds, and didn't ask for payment they knew you couldn't provide. In most wasteland towns, that kind of charity would be seen as weakness, an invitation for raiders and drifters to take advantage. But Good Springs has survived this long by being just kind enough to earn goodwill and just isolated enough that raiders usually pass it by in favor of bigger targets. That isolation ends when the powder gangers arrive. These are escaped convicts from the NCR Correctional Facility, prisoners who were serving time for crimes ranging from theft to murder before they overpowered their guards, seized control of the prison, and scattered across the Mojave in gangs that survive through robbery and intimidation. One of those gangs led by a man named Joe Cobb. He doesn't care about the town or its people. He just wants to collect his bounty and move on. But when Trudy tells him you're under the town's protection, Cobb decides that taking Good Springs apart might be worth the effort if it means getting to you and looting whatever supplies the townspeople have stored away. He gives them an ultimatum: hand you over, or he'll come back with his full gang and burn the town to ash. Then he leaves to gather his forces, giving Good Springs time to decide whether protecting a stranger is worth fighting and dying for. This is where the game gives you your first real choice, and it's designed to establish the moral framework for everything that follows. You can convince the townspeople to fight beside you, arming them with weapons and explosives and planning an ambush for when Cobb returns. You can side with the powder gangers, betraying the people who saved your life in exchange for reputation with a gang that controls key roads across the Mojave. Or you can leave, walk away before the violence starts, and let Good Springs make its own choice about whether to fight or surrender. Most players choose to fight. It feels righteous to defend the town that helped you, to stand beside people who showed kindness when they didn't have to. The battle itself is brutal in the way all Fallout combat is brutal. Bodies dropping, blood spreading across the sand, screams cutting off mid-breath as bullets find vital organs. Good Springs has the advantage of defensive positions, and because you're competent enough with a weapon to make a difference. Cobb dies, his gang scatters, and Good Springs survives, at least for now. But here's the darkness the game doesn't tell you explicitly. You've just signed Good Springs' death warrant. The powder gangers control the roads between here and New Vegas. They run protection rackets on every trade caravan that passes through their territory. By killing Cobb and his gang, you've made Good Springs an enemy of every powder ganger in the Mojave. Maybe not today, maybe not this week, but eventually another gang will come through, recognize this as the town that killed their people, and they'll finish what Cobb started. The townspeople will die, and it'll be because you convinced them to fight for you. The game never forces you to confront this consequence directly. Good Springs doesn't get wiped out in a scripted event. The residents don't blame you or call you out for the target you painted on them. But the logic is inescapable once you think about it. In a wasteland where every faction remembers grudges and punishes anyone who crosses them, protecting you turned Good Springs into a liability that will eventually be eliminated. You save them today by killing them tomorrow. This is the moral complexity that defines New Vegas. The game presents choices that feel clear in the moment, defend innocent people from murderous raiders, but carry consequences that corrupt the righteousness of that choice. You're not wrong to defend Good Springs, but you're also not innocent of what your defense will cost them. The wasteland doesn't allow for clean victories, only different flavors of compromise and loss. And this is just the beginning. Good Springs is a tutorial in how New Vegas's darkness works. Every faction you'll meet, every ally you'll recruit, every choice you'll make, they all follow this same pattern. Good intentions that create terrible outcomes. Necessary violence that spirals into atrocity. People try to build something better, who end up building something worse. The Mojave grinds up idealism and spits out pragmatism, and by the time you reach New Vegas, you'll have so much blood on your hands that washing it off won't even occur to you as an option anymore. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. You're still recovering, still learning how to navigate a wasteland that wants you dead. The road to New Vegas cuts through a dozen smaller hells before you reach the big one. Let's walk it together. Chapter 3, Prim. Prim sits on the border between NCR territory and no man's land. A small town built around a pre-war casino called the Bison Steve. Before the war, Prim was a tourist stop, the kind of place families visited on road trips to Vegas for cheap hotels and cheaper entertainment. After the war, it became one of the few settlements between the NCR's western holdings and the Colorado River, which made it valuable as a trade route waypoint but also made it a target for anyone who wanted to control that trade. When you arrive, Prim is under siege. The same powder ganger prison break that sent Joe Cobb to Good Springs scattered dozens of other escaped convicts across the region, and one group has taken over the Bison Steve Casino, turned it into a fortress, and started extorting travelers who pass through town. The NCR has a small outpost nearby, but they're stretched thin protecting the Mojave outpost to the south, and can't spare troops to liberate a town that isn't technically under their jurisdiction. So Prim's residents are trapped, hiding in buildings while the powder gangers loot and murder anyone who resists. The deputy who's supposed to protect the town is a broken man named Beagle who got himself captured early in the siege and is being held hostage by the gang's leader, a convict named Samuel Cook. Beagle isn't a fighter, wasn't trained for combat, and only took the deputy position because the old sheriff died and someone had to wear the badge. Now he's tied up in the casino, waiting for rescue or execution, whichever comes first. The actual sheriff is a pre-war robot named Prim Slim, a reprogrammed protectron that was designed to entertain tourists, but got rebuilt to enforce laws after the sheriff's death. Slim has the authority to protect Prim, but not the initiative to act without being activated by someone with proper administrative access. You're asked to help liberate the town. The NCR won't do it officially, but they'll look the other way if you want to clear out the casino on your own. The townspeople can't pay you, but they'll be grateful, which in the wasteland counts as compensation even though gratitude doesn't buy ammunition or food. You can choose to help, choose to ignore them, or choose to negotiate with the powder gangers for safe passage through their territory in exchange for leaving them in control of Prim. Most players fight. The casino becomes a shooting gallery as you work your way through floors filled with convicts who've spent weeks drinking, looting, and terrorizing hostages. Some of them surrender when they see you cutting through their friends. Most fight to the death because running means getting hunted down by other powder ganger groups for being cowards. You rescue Beagle, who thanks you profusely while making it clear he has no intention of actually defending the town if another threat arrives. And you kill Samuel Cook, who dies cursing the NCR for imprisoning him, cursing you for killing him, cursing the entire wasteland for being exactly as brutal as he learned to be. With Prim liberated, the town needs a new sheriff. Beagle won't do it, too traumatized by his captivity to even wear the badge anymore. This is where the game presents another choice that seems straightforward but reveals its darkness on examination. You can convince the NCR to annex Prim and station troops there, permanently. You can reprogram Prim Slim to act as sheriff, giving the town a robot lawman who will enforce order without corruption or cowardice. Or you can recruit a man named Myers, a convicted murderer, serving time in the NCR correctional facility, and convince the NCR to pardon him in exchange for his service as Prim's sheriff. Each option has consequences that the game telegraphs subtly, but doesn't explain fully until much later. If you bring in the NCR, Prim gets protection, but loses its independence. The Republic will station troops there, demand taxes, and gradually absorb the town into its bureaucratic empire, whether the residents want that or not. If you activate Prim Slim, the town gets a sheriff who can't be bribed or intimidated, but also can't show mercy or make exceptions. Slim will enforce the law exactly as programmed, which means executing petty thieves and treating minor infractions the same as major crimes. And if you recruit Myers, you're putting a man with a history of violence in charge of a town's protection and hoping his desire for redemption outweighs whatever impulses led him to murder in the first place. There's no perfect option. Prim will survive under any of these sheriffs, but survival comes with different costs depending on which authority you impose. The NCR option trades freedom for security. The Prim Slim option trades humanity for consistency. The Myers option trades stability for the hope that a violent man can change. And underlying all of it is the reality that Prim needs external force to survive because its own residents can't or won't defend themselves. They're dependent on protection they can't provide, which means they'll always be subject to whoever provides it. This dependency reveals one of New Vegas's core themes. In a wasteland where violence is constant and resources are scarce, communities survive only by sacrificing autonomy to whoever has bigger guns. The strong impose order on the weak, and the weak accept that order because resistance means death. It's not slavery exactly. Most factions maintain the fiction of voluntary participation, but it's not freedom either. It's the compromise that everyone makes to stay alive in a world where staying alive is harder than dying. Prim is a microcosm of the entire Mojave's power structure. Every settlement you'll visit, every faction you'll encounter, they all operate on this same principle. Protection requires submission. Survival requires surrendering pieces of yourself to systems that value order over individual dignity. And the people who refuse that compromise, who insist on maintaining their independence and defending themselves, they're the ones who end up as corpses decorating the roadside or slaves in Caesar's legion. The darkness here isn't in the powder gangers' violence. Violence is easy to recognize, easy to oppose. The darkness is in the realization that even after you've killed the violent men and saved the helpless town, you haven't actually fixed anything. You've just transferred dependence from one authority to another, and Prim will keep needing rescue until something kills enough of its residents that the town finally dies for good. That's not cynicism. That's realism in a post-apocalyptic wasteland where communities survive only as long as stronger forces allow them to. That explains why settlements keep getting attacked, but it doesn't explain why people stay in places like Prim when running would be safer. The answer is more uncomfortable than most players realize, and it requires understanding the geography of trauma in the Mojave. Chapter 4: Nipton and the Lottery of Suffering. The road from Prim to New Vegas cuts through the southern Mojave, skirting the edge of territory controlled by Caesar's Legion. This is borderland, places where NCR patrols are sparse and Legion raiding parties cross the Colorado River to probe defenses, capture slaves, and send messages about what happens to communities that resist Rome's expansion. Most towns this close to Legion territory have either been absorbed into the Empire, destroyed completely, or abandoned by residents who fled west toward NCR protection. Nipton didn't flee. It was a small settlement that survived by playing both sides, taking payments from NCR traders to provide rest and supplies, then selling information about those traders to Legion slavers who'd ambush the caravans once they left town. The mayor, a man named Joseph Stein, built Nipton's economy on betrayal, convincing himself that neutrality meant profiting from both factions while remaining loyal to neither. He thought he was being clever, exploiting the war without picking a side, taking payment from people he knew would be enslaved or killed based on information he provided. The Legion decided to teach Nipton about the price of playing neutral. A man named Vulpes Inculta, one of Caesar's frumentori who serves as scout, spy, and terrorist, arrived in Nipton with a century of legionaries and announced that the town would participate in a lottery. Everyone in Nipton, residents and visitors alike, would draw a ticket. Winners would be allowed to leave. Losers would die. Stein protested that Nipton had helped the Legion, that they'd provided valuable intelligence, that they deserved better treatment than enemies. Inculta explained that traitors who betray one master will betray any master, and therefore cannot be trusted. The lottery proceeded. When you arrive, Nipton is burning. Bodies are crucified along the road leading into town. People who drew losing tickets nailed to crosses and left to die slowly from dehydration and exposure. The few survivors huddle in buildings, traumatized beyond coherent speech, repeating fragments of what happened. The mayor is alive but crippled, his legs broken so he can't run, left among the corpses as a monument to the Legion's judgment, and standing in the middle of town, surrounded by his legionaries, is Vulpes Inculta, waiting calmly to explain what happened and why. Inculta doesn't attack you when you arrive. He introduces himself, explains the lottery, and describes it as justice rather than atrocity. Nipton profited from betrayal, he says. So Nipton was punished for betrayal. The people crucified along the road knew the risks of living in a town that sold information to slavers. The survivors were spared to carry word of what happens to communities that think they can profit from the Legion without submitting to its authority. This wasn't random violence, this was calculated terrorism designed to send a message to every other settlement in the Mojave that neutrality is not an option, and cooperation with the NCR makes you an enemy worthy of destruction. The game lets you respond to Inculta however you want. You can attack him and his century, though the combat will be brutal, and you'll earn the Legion's permanent hatred. You can listen to his explanation and walk, leaving Nipton to burn and its survivors to whatever fate awaits them. Or you can engage with his logic, asking questions about the Legion's methods and Caesar's philosophy, treating this terrorist as someone whose perspective deserves consideration rather than immediate violence. This is one of the most disturbing choices New Vegas presents because the game doesn't condemn Inculta explicitly. He's not presented as a monster ranting about chaos or evil. He's calm, articulate, and genuinely believes that what he did in Nipton was both necessary and just. From his perspective, the Legion is bringing order to a wasteland that has festered in anarchy for 2 centuries. The NCR is a corrupt democracy that spreads its weakness across every territory it claims. Independent towns like Nipton are parasites that survive by betraying anyone who trusts them. Caesar's Legion offers stability, purpose, and the harsh justice required to rebuild civilization from ruins. If that requires crucifying traitors and burning towns that refuse submission, then those are acceptable costs for a greater good. The darkness in Nipton isn't just the Legion's brutality. Brutality is easy to oppose, easy to recognize as wrong. The darkness is that Inculta's logic is internally consistent. Nipton was profiting from betrayal. The mayor did sell out traders to slavers. The residents did know what their town's economy was built on and chose to benefit from it anyway. The Legion's response was disproportionate and monstrous, but it wasn't entirely unjustified. The game forces you to sit with that uncomfortable reality that sometimes the victims of atrocity are also perpetrators of harm, and punishing them doesn't make the punishment righteous. Most players kill Inculta anyway because leaving him alive feels like endorsing what he did. But killing him doesn't undo Nipton's burning or resurrect the crucified. It just adds more bodies to a town that's already dead. And if you kill him here, you make an enemy of the Legion permanently, closing off quest lines and diplomatic options that might have let you navigate the Mojave's politics without committing to total war against one of its most powerful factions. The game punishes righteous violence by making it politically costly, forcing you to weigh your moral outrage against your strategic interests. This is the kind of darkness that defines New Vegas. Not clear battles between good and evil, but murky situations where everyone has blood on their hands, and choosing who to support means choosing which atrocities you're willing to tolerate. Nipton is a preview of the impossible choices waiting for you in New Vegas itself. Every faction you'll meet has committed acts that should disqualify them from your support. Every leader you'll encounter has justified terrible things by claiming necessity, and the game will make you complicit in someone's atrocity, no matter which path you choose, because clean hands are not an option in a wasteland built on violence. The Legion is the most obvious villain in New Vegas' story, but calling them villains oversimplifies what the game is actually exploring. Let's examine Caesar's Legion more closely, understand what they represent, and why the game bothers to give them a coherent philosophy instead of just making them cartoonish evil. Chapter 5: The Legion and the Cult of Stability. Caesar's Legion is a slaving empire built on the corpse of 87 tribes that were conquered, absorbed, and reprogrammed into a military machine modeled after ancient Rome. The man who built it is Edward Sallow, a former follower of the Apocalypse who traveled east to study tribal linguistics and ended up becoming the self-proclaimed son of Mars, ruling over an army of thousands. He renamed himself Caesar, adopted the aesthetics and organizational structure of Rome's military dictatorship, and spent 20 years conquering everything east of the Colorado River through a combination of overwhelming force and strategic brutality. The Legion doesn't negotiate, it doesn't sign treaties or respect territorial boundaries. It conquers. When a tribe refuses to submit, the Legion's response is total. The men are crucified or conscripted into the army's lowest ranks. The women are enslaved and distributed among officers as rewards for service. The children are taken, renamed, and raised as legionaries who know no identity except the one Caesar provides. Entire cultures are erased in a generation, their languages forbidden, their traditions destroyed, their histories rewritten to serve the Legion's mythology. From the outside, this looks like pure barbarism, the resurrection of humanity's worst imperial impulses, dressed up in Latin phrases and Roman iconography. The NCR sees the Legion as everything civilization is supposed to have moved beyond: slavery, dictatorship, the treatment of women as property, the elevation of military conquest as the highest virtue. Most players share that assessment, viewing the Legion as the obvious villain faction that only exists to give you something unambiguously evil to fight against. But New Vegas doesn't let you off that easily. If you travel east to meet Caesar himself at his camp near the fort, he'll explain his philosophy directly, and it's more sophisticated than most players expect. Caesar isn't just a warlord who likes conquering things. He's a man with a theory about how to rebuild civilization after apocalypse, and his theory is rooted in a reading of Hegelian dialectics that he learned before abandoning the followers to build his empire. Caesar argues that the NCR and the Legion represent thesis and antithesis in a dialectical process. The NCR is the thesis, an attempt to rebuild old-world democracy complete with all its corruption, bureaucracy, and weakness. They're spread thin across territory they can't effectively govern, corrupted by Brahmin barons and military officers who care more about career advancement than serving citizens, clinging to a political system that failed to prevent nuclear war and will inevitably fail again. The Legion is the antithesis, a totalitarian military dictatorship that rejects everything the NCR represents. No democracy, no individual rights, no mercy for weakness, just the absolute authority of Caesar and the strength of unified purpose. The synthesis, Caesar explains, will occur when the Legion conquers New Vegas and absorbs the city into its empire. Vegas will become the capital of a new civilization that combines the NCR's technology and infrastructure with the Legion's discipline and unity. The resulting state will be neither democracy nor dictatorship, but something new, something capable of actually rebuilding human civilization instead of just limping along in the ruins of the old world. Caesar isn't a madman or a simple brute. He's an ideologue who genuinely believes his methods, however brutal, serve a higher purpose. The slaves he takes will be freed in the new civilization he's building. The tribes he erases will be replaced by a unified culture strong enough to survive another apocalypse. The crucifixions and the massacres are temporary necessities, birth pangs of a new Rome that will bring stability to a wasteland that has known only chaos for 2 centuries. The problem with Caesar's theory, which the game lets you point out if your character is educated enough, is that he's fundamentally misunderstood dialectics. The synthesis isn't supposed to be imposed through conquest. It emerges from the conflict between thesis and antithesis through a process that preserves valuable elements of both while transcending their limitations. Caesar is trying to force synthesis by destroying one side of the dialectic and absorbing its resources, which means the result won't be a new civilization at all. It'll just be the Legion with better infrastructure, still built on slavery and brutality, still dependent on Caesar's personal authority to maintain cohesion. And this is where the Legion's darkness becomes fully visible. If you talk to legionaries below Caesar's rank, you discover that most of them don't understand his philosophy. They follow him because they were raised to follow him, because disobedience means crucifixion, because the Legion is the only identity they've ever known. The synthesis Caesar promises isn't something his followers believe in or work toward. It's a justification he uses to make conquest seem like progress. The Legion also has a terminal weakness that Caesar refuses to acknowledge. He's dying of a brain tumor, and he has no clear successor. When you meet Legate Lanius, the Legion's military commander and Caesar's presumptive heir, you're meeting a man who embodies pure military might with no interest in philosophy or governance. Lanius doesn't care about dialectical synthesis. He cares about conquest, about crushing the NCR, and adding their territory to the Legion's holdings. If Caesar dies and Lanius takes command, the Legion will continue conquering without the intellectual framework that makes Caesar's vision seem like anything more than organized barbarism. The game lets you see this if you pursue the Legion questline. You can work for Caesar, prove yourself valuable, and earn enough trust to participate in the assault on Hoover Dam. Along the way, you'll witness firsthand what the Legion does to conquered people. You'll see slaves with bomb collars forced to fight and die in the arena for legionaries' entertainment. You'll meet women who've been reduced to property, existing only to provide children and labor for their masters. You'll encounter former tribe members who've had their entire identities erased, who speak Latin phrases they don't understand and worship a man they've never met because refusing to do so means death. The Legion's stability is real. Territory under Caesar's control is safe from raiders, free from the corruption that plagues NCR governance, unified in purpose in ways that democratic societies never achieve. But that stability is purchased with the complete elimination of individual freedom, the reduction of half the population to slavery, and the institutional brutality required to maintain absolute obedience. It's the stability of a prison camp, where nobody causes trouble because causing trouble means being nailed to a cross and left to die over the course of days. Most players reject the Legion entirely, killing Caesar when they get the chance, and siding with factions that at least pretend to value human dignity. But a small percentage of players complete Legion quest lines, and the game never condemns them for it. Instead, it shows what choosing the Legion means. The ending slides describe Legion victory with clinical precision. Towns that resisted are destroyed. Populations are enslaved. The Mojave becomes part of Caesar's empire, safe and orderly and utterly devoid of the messy freedom that characterized it before conquest. It's presented as one possible future among many, neither endorsed nor condemned, just documented as a choice with consequences. This moral neutrality is part of what makes New Vegas dark. The game understands that fascism appeals to people who value order over freedom, who believe that strong authority is preferable to democratic chaos, who think that temporary brutality is acceptable if it leads to long-term stability. Instead of simply declaring those people wrong, New Vegas shows what their choice creates. It lets you see the Legion's camps, meet its slaves, witness its methods, and then it asks whether the stability is worth it. The answer for most players is no, but the fact that the game asks a question seriously, that it presents Caesar as articulate and his followers as genuinely devoted, that it makes Legion territory demonstrably safer than NCR territory, forces players to confront uncomfortable truths about what civilization requires and what people are willing to sacrifice for security. That's the darkness. Not that the Legion exists, but that its existence makes sense. That there are people in the wasteland who genuinely prefer its brutal order to the NCR's ineffective democracy. That given the choice between freedom with constant threat and slavery with guaranteed protection, some people choose slavery. The game doesn't judge them for that choice. It just shows what the choice produces and leaves you to decide whether you can live with it. But if the Legion represents thesis turned at nightmare, what about the NCR? They're supposed to be the good guys, the faction trying to rebuild democracy and restore civilization. Let's examine whether that reputation survives closer inspection. Chapter 6. The NCR and the Weight of Empire. The new California Republic began in the ruins of Shady Sands, a small farming community founded by vault dwellers and wastelanders who wanted to build something better than raider gangs and subsistence survival. Over the course of a century and a half, that community grew into the largest unified government in post-apocalyptic America, claiming territory from Baja California to the Mojave and governing millions of citizens under an elected government modeled after pre-war American democracy. The NCR has courts, laws, currency backed by gold reserves, and a standing military capable of fighting organized wars. They've rebuilt infrastructure, cleared trade routes, and offered protection to settlements that join their republic. To people living in the wasteland's lawless territories, the NCR represents hope, proof that civilization can be restored, that humanity doesn't have to live in constant violence and chaos. They're not perfect, but they're trying, which in a post-apocalyptic world counts as heroic. This is what most players believe when they first encounter the NCR in New Vegas. The soldiers you meet at Mojave Outpost talk about protecting trade, routes, and maintaining order. The troopers stationed at Camp McCarran are fighting to hold territory against Legion raids. Ambassador Crocker in New Vegas speaks eloquently about spreading democracy and freedom across the wasteland. The NCR's presence feels like the closest thing to legitimate government that the Mojave has seen in 200 years. But if you spend time in NCR territory, talk to soldiers and settlers and traders, examine the Republic's actual governance rather than its propaganda, you discover that the NCR is an empire collapsing under its own weight. The problems start with overextension. The Republic controls more territory than it can effectively govern. They've annexed so many towns and regions that their military and administrative resources are stretched impossibly thin. Outposts go weeks without supplies. Soldiers patrol roads they can't possibly secure. Settlements that join the Republic expecting protection find themselves taxed heavily and defended poorly, getting all of annexation's burdens with few of its benefits. The military situation is worse. General Lee Oliver, who commands NCR forces in the Mojave, is a political officer who earned his position through connections rather than competence. He's obsessed with winning a decisive victory against the Legion at Hoover Dam, convinced that crushing Caesar in open battle will prove the Republic's superiority and secure his legacy. But his strategies are predictable, his defenses are static, and his understanding of the Legion's tactics is superficial at best. The only reason the NCR hasn't been driven out of the Mojave already is that Chief Hanlon, the Ranger commander, has been running guerrilla operations and intelligence campaigns that compensate for Oliver's incompetence. The political situation is even worse. Back in California, Brahmin barons have bought enough senators to control policy, turning the Republic's government into a vehicle for corporate interests disguised as democracy. The military expansion into the Mojave wasn't driven by defensive necessity or humanitarian concern. It was driven by ranchers who wanted access to Vegas's water and agriculture interests who wanted control of Hoover Dam's electricity. The soldiers dying in Legion raids are dying to secure profit margins for wealthy citizens who'll never see the front lines. And underneath the official government, corruption is endemic. Every NCR officer you meet can be bribed. Supply officers sell military equipment to traders on the black market. Commanders look the other way when their troops steal from settlements they're supposed to protect. The Camp McCarran questline reveals that the base is infiltrated by Legion spies, and nobody noticed because the officers were too busy fighting over jurisdictions and promotions to actually maintain security. The NCR also has a refugee crisis it refuses to address. Freeside, the neighborhood surrounding New Vegas's strip, is filled with people who traveled to the Mojave believing the NCR's promises about prosperity and opportunity. Instead, they found a war zone where jobs are scarce and protection is scarcer. The NCR built an embassy in Freeside but won't grant citizenship to its residents, won't provide security for their streets, won't take responsibility for people who uprooted their lives based on Republic propaganda. These refugees survive through begging, petty crime, and the charity of the followers of the apocalypse, who provide medical care and food with resources that should be coming from the government that encourage these people to come here. If you work for the NCR, completing quests for their officers and advancing their interests, you'll encounter mission after mission that exposes the Republic's dysfunction. You'll negotiate with the Khans, trying to convince them not to ally with the Legion, only to discover that the NCR has a history of massacring Khan families and breaking treaties whenever those treaties become inconvenient. You'll investigate missing scouts and find that soldiers are being killed because command won't provide proper equipment or reinforcements. You'll see officers order attacks that waste lives because success would boost their career prospects. Chief Hanlon, the one truly competent leader the NCR has in the Mojave, is so demoralized by what the Republic has become that he's actively sabotaging his own side. He's falsifying intelligence reports, making the Legion seem weaker than they actually are, hoping that if the NCR thinks they're winning easily, they'll withdraw from the Mojave and stop wasting lives on an imperial expansion that serves corporate interests rather than citizens. When you discover his sabotage, he explains his reasoning calmly. The NCR he's served for decades no longer exists. It's been replaced by an empire that calls itself a republic, that uses democratic rhetoric to justify conquest, that sends young soldiers to die for territories it can't govern and doesn't need. Hanlon's quest ends with him either being arrested for treason or committing suicide after confessing his actions publicly. Both endings are tragic because Hanlon is right about what the NCR has become, but being right doesn't stop the Republic from grinding forward, sending more soldiers to die, annexing more territory it can't manage, spreading the same democratic dysfunction across more of the wasteland. The darkness of the NCR isn't that they're evil, it's that they're familiar. They're the collapse of American democracy translated into post-apocalyptic terms. All the corruption and imperial overreach and corporate capture that characterized pre-war America, just with fewer resources and less ability to hide the dysfunction. The NCR isn't rebuilding civilization. They're rebuilding the systems that destroyed civilization the first time. And they're doing it with the unshakable conviction that democracy is inherently good even when the democracy in question serves only the wealthy and powerful. This creates an impossible situation for players who want to support the good guys. The NCR is better than the Legion in the sense that they don't practice slavery or crucify dissidents, but they're not good. They're a corrupt empire wearing democracy's clothes, spreading instability everywhere they expand, and bleeding out slowly from wounds their leaders refuse to acknowledge. Supporting them means choosing slow decline over immediate brutality, incompetent imperialism over competent fascism. It's a choice, but it's not a heroic one. And if you follow the NCR's questline to completion, win the battle at Hoover Dam, and secure their control of the Mojave, the ending slides make clear what NCR victory produces. The Republic annexes New Vegas, bringing its corruption and bureaucracy to the Strip. Settlements that help the NCR get taxed heavily and receive minimal protection. Independent communities are forced to join or be treated as enemies. The Mojave becomes another piece of NCR territory, governed poorly, exploited thoroughly, and gradually declining alongside the rest of the Republic's crumbling empire. You didn't save the Mojave by siding with the NCR. You just changed which empire controls it, trading the Legion's brutal stability for the Republic's democratic chaos. The wasteland keeps grinding, the violence continues, and the only thing that's changed is which flag flies over Hoover Dam. That's the darkness the NCR represents. Not villainy, but failure. The slow, grinding, inevitable failure of institutions that start with noble ideals and decay into vehicles for exploitation. The game shows you that decay in detail, makes you complicit in it if you choose to support the Republic, and then asks whether preserving a failed democracy is better than letting something else replace it. Most players still choose the NCR because at least they're trying to be good even if they're failing. But trying doesn't fix the Mojave's problems, doesn't save the people trapped between empires, doesn't address the fundamental reality that civilization might not be rebuildable using the same models that destroyed it. And that uncomfortable thought brings us to the third major faction, a man who rejected both the NCR's democracy and the Legion's dictatorship in favor of something entirely different. Let's talk about Robert House and the dream of technocratic autocracy. Chapter 7, Mr. House and the Benevolent Dictator. Robert Edwin House was born in the year 2023 and never actually died. When the Great War came in 2077, House saw it coming months in advance, calculated probable launch dates, and prepared accordingly. He turned the Lucky 38 casino into a fortified command center, linked himself to life support system that would keep his body alive indefinitely, and developed an army of Securitrons, combat robots loyal only to him, to defend the New Vegas Strip from everything the apocalypse would throw at it. His plan almost worked perfectly. House's missile defense system shot down most of the nuclear warheads targeting Las Vegas, preventing the complete destruction that leveled cities across the globe. The city survived relatively intact, its casinos still standing, its infrastructure damaged but repairable. House himself survived in a hermetically sealed chamber, his body atrophying but his mind remaining sharp, connected to computer systems that let him control his robot army and manage the Strip from isolation. For 200 years, House waited. He watched civilization collapse into tribalism and barbarism. He saw the NCR rise in California and begin expanding eastward. He tracked the Legion's growth across the eastern wasteland, and he prepared for the moment when both factions would inevitably converge on Las Vegas, turning the city into a battleground that would determine the Mojave's future. When that moment arrived, House was ready. He had his robot army, control of the Strip's casinos, and most importantly, he had the Platinum chip. The chip is a data storage device containing operating system upgrades for House's Securitrons and access codes for an underground bunker beneath the fort where hundreds of additional robots wait in storage. With the chip, House can upgrade his army from competent security force to military power capable of overwhelming both NCR and Legion forces. Without it, he's trapped in a defensive position, strong enough to hold the Strip but too weak to expand his control beyond it. This is why Benny stealing the chip was an existential threat, and why House hires you to recover it once you've demonstrated your capability by surviving a bullet to the head. House's vision for the Mojave is radically different from the NCR's democracy or the Legion's dictatorship. He wants to establish what he calls autocracy, enlightened rule by a single supremely intelligent individual who makes decisions based on rational analysis rather than ideology or popular sentiment. No elections, no bureaucracy, no compromise with stupidity or incompetence, just House's brain, enhanced by computer systems and unburdened by physical decay, ruling Vegas and gradually expanding its prosperity across the wasteland. This isn't tyranny in House's view, it's engineering. Human societies fail, he argues, because they're designed by committees and mobs, by people who prioritize feelings over data, ideology over results. Democracy produces lowest common denominator governance, where good policies get vetoed because they're unpopular, and bad policies get implemented because they sound appealing. Dictatorship produces unstable succession crises, where everything depends on one leader's competence and collapses when that leader dies. House offers stability without succession risk, governance without democratic dysfunction, progress without ideological constraints. He's not mortal in any meaningful sense, which means his rule can continue indefinitely, providing the long-term consistency required to actually rebuild civilization, rather than just stumbling forward generation after generation. The appeal of House's vision is undeniable. He's demonstrably brilliant, capable of predicting nuclear war and surviving it, of building robot armies from pre-war technology, of keeping the strip functioning while the rest of the world collapsed into chaos. He has concrete plans for expansion, resource development, and technological advancement. Within 5 years of securing control of the Mojave, he claims, he'll have re-established sophisticated manufacturing. Within 10 years, he'll have functional spacecraft. Within 20 years, he'll have colonized other worlds, ensuring humanity's survival beyond Earth's irradiated surface. These aren't fantasies. House predicted the Great War within a one-day margin of error. His technological achievements are visible across the strip. When he says he can rebuild civilization better than the NCR or the Legion, he has the credentials to back that claim. Siding with House means betting on competence, rationality, and vision against the NCR's corruption and the Legion's brutality. But there's a darkness in House's philosophy that becomes visible if you spend time examining how he actually governs. The strip is divided into casinos, each run by a tribe that House recruited from the wasteland, civilized through a combination of incentives and threats, and installed as managers of his entertainment economy. The chairmen run the tops, the White Glove Society operates the Ultra Looks, and the Omertas control Gomorrah. These tribes weren't given these positions through merit or democratic process. House chose them because they were malleable enough to reshape and ambitious enough to be controlled through promises of wealth and status. The tribes have prospered under House's rule, at least in material terms. They have electricity, running water, protection from raiders and radiation. They've gone from wearing scrap metal and living in tents to wearing suits and managing profitable businesses. House gave them civilization, and all he demanded in return was absolute obedience. They can run their casinos however they want as long as they generate profit and don't challenge his authority. Step outside those boundaries, and House will remove them with the same ruthless efficiency he uses to eliminate any other malfunctioning component. This is governance as software management. House doesn't see the tribes as people with inherent dignity or rights. He sees them as programs running on human hardware, useful as long as they perform their designated functions, disposable when they malfunction. When Benny betrayed him by stealing the chip, House's response wasn't anger or hurt. It was the calm calculation of an engineer identifying a corrupted file that needs deletion. Benny failed to function according to specifications, so Benny must be terminated. The fact that Benny is a person with his own desires and motivations is irrelevant to House's analysis. If you work for House, recovering the chip and helping him consolidate power, you'll see this transactional worldview in action. House sends you to deal with the Omertas, who are plotting to betray him by allying with the Legion. He sends you to handle the White Glove Society, who are reverting to cannibalism and threatening to create a scandal that would drive customers away from the strip. He sends you to the Brotherhood of Steel Bunker with orders to negotiate their allegiance or exterminate them entirely. Each assignment is framed in purely utilitarian terms. These groups are either assets or threats. If they're assets, secure them. If they're threats, eliminate them. Morality doesn't enter the calculation because morality, in House's view, is a human weakness that clouds rational decision-making. The Brotherhood of Steel Quest reveals House's philosophy in its starkest form. The Brotherhood is a quasi-religious military order dedicated to preserving pre-war technology. They've established a bunker near Vegas and have been raiding NCR and Legion caravans for weapons and equipment. House wants them eliminated because their technological hoarding interferes with his plans, and their military capability represents a potential threat. When you tell him the Brotherhood is a spent force, barely surviving isolationist by necessity rather than choice, House doesn't care. They have technology they won't share. They have soldiers who might resist his rule. Therefore they must be destroyed. No negotiation, no compromise, no consideration of their perspective or history. Just elimination of a variable that doesn't fit his equations. You can try to broker peace between House and the Brotherhood's elder. You can argue that they could be useful allies, that their technical expertise might benefit his rebuilding plans. House refuses. The Brotherhood's ideology makes them fundamentally incompatible with his vision, he explains. They believe technology should be controlled by an elect few who understand its dangers. House believes technology should be deployed by whoever can use it most effectively to advance human prosperity. These philosophies cannot coexist, so one must be eliminated. Since House has superior force, the Brotherhood dies. The coldness of this logic is chilling, but it's also internally consistent. House isn't being cruel, he's being efficient. The Brotherhood represents an obstacle to his plans, and obstacles get removed. The fact that the obstacle consists of human beings with their own beliefs and communities doesn't change the calculation. From House's perspective, preserving a few dozen Brotherhood members while allowing their ideology to impede technological progress would be the cruel choice, prioritizing sentiment over the greater good. This utilitarian autocracy creates a city that's prosperous but hollow. The Strip is safe, clean, profitable, and entirely artificial. The casinos cater to wealthy NCR citizens who come to gamble and drink while their government collapses around them. The tribes provide services with smiles that don't reach their eyes, acting out House's vision of civilized behavior while knowing they're one disappointing quarterly report away from being replaced. The Securitrons patrol streets cleared of poverty and desperation by the simple expedient of keeping poor people out. Freeside, the slum surrounding the Strip, absorbs everyone who doesn't meet House's standards, creating a border between prosperity and squalor that's enforced by robots programmed to kill trespassers. Freeside is crucial to understanding House's darkness. It's not an accident or an unfortunate consequence of resource scarcity. It's deliberate policy. House could extend his protection to Freeside, could use his wealth to provide basic services to the refugees and poor who cluster around his borders. He chooses not to, because in his calculation those people don't contribute to his economic model. They're consumers without purchasing power, mouths to feed that don't generate profit. Helping them would be charity, and charity is inefficient allocation of resources that could be spent advancing his technological goals. The followers of the apocalypse operate a clinic in Freeside, providing medical care to people House ignores. They're funded by donations and staffed by idealists who believe healthcare is a right rather than a commodity. House tolerates them because they solve a problem, keeping Freeside stable enough that it doesn't threaten the Strip without requiring his involvement. But he doesn't support them, doesn't fund them, doesn't acknowledge that their work is filling gaps his governance creates. They're useful garbage collectors, maintaining order in the slum so he doesn't have to waste robot patrols on it. If you talk to the followers' leaders, particularly a woman named Julie Farkas, you'll hear their perspective on House. They recognize his brilliance, acknowledge that the Strip's prosperity is real, but argue that civilization built on deliberate exclusion of the vulnerable isn't civilization at all. It's just a gated community with robot guards, a return to pre-war inequality where the wealthy prospered behind walls while everyone else suffered outside. The fact that House is smarter than pre-war elites doesn't change the fundamental structure. It just means the exploitation is more efficient. The game lets you see both perspectives and forces you to decide which matters more, efficiency or inclusion, technocratic competence or democratic accountability, House's vision of spaceflight and technological renaissance, or the followers' insistence that advancement means nothing if it doesn't improve life for everyone. There's no option that satisfies both values. House will not compromise his vision to accommodate sentiment about the poor. The followers cannot accept a system that treats human suffering as acceptable collateral damage for future progress. If you complete House's questline, secure his control of the Mojave by upgrading his Securitron army and winning the battle at Hoover Dam, the ending slides describe what House victory produces. The Strip prospers beyond anything seen in the post-apocalyptic world. Within months, House expands his control across the Mojave, bringing order and infrastructure to settlements that accept his rule. Technology flourishes, trade increases, the region becomes measurably wealthier and more stable than under NCR or Legion control, but Freeside remains a slum. The refugees who came to the Mojave hoping for better lives stay trapped in poverty. Independent communities that refuse to submit to House's authority get conquered by his Securitron army. The tribes that helped you throughout the game either bend to House's will or get destroyed, and humanity's future gets decided not by humanity collectively, but by one man's calculations, brilliant and rational and utterly disconnected from the messy, irrational, deeply human concerns that make life worth living beyond mere survival and efficiency. This is the darkness House represents, not evil, but the elimination of everything that can't be quantified. He'll build a civilization that reaches the stars, but it'll be a civilization where human value is measured in economic productivity, and deviation from optimal behavior gets corrected by security robots. It's the libertarian fantasy taken to its logical extreme. Perfect freedom for those who meet the system's standards, complete exclusion for those who don't, and one supremely intelligent authority deciding where the line falls. Most players who side with House convince themselves they're choosing the lesser evil, that his autocracy is preferable to the NCR's collapse or the Legion's slavery. But the game makes clear that House doesn't see himself as a lesser evil. He sees himself as unambiguously good, the only leader with the intelligence and vision required to save humanity from itself. The fact that his salvation excludes most of humanity, that it treats human beings as components in a machine rather than ends in themselves, doesn't trouble him because those concerns are irrational, and House has spent 2 centuries eliminating irrationality from his decision-making. If the NCR is failed democracy and the Legion is successful fascism, and House is technocratic autocracy, where does that leave you? What happens if you reject all 3 factions and try to chart an independent path? That's the 4th option New Vegas offers, and it's the most complex choice of all. Chapter 8. Independence and the Gambler's Fallacy. The independent path begins with a man named Yes Man, a Securitron that Benny reprogrammed to help him overthrow House and seize control of New Vegas for himself. Yes Man's programming includes one crucial feature. He cannot refuse requests from anyone who asks him for help. This makes him the perfect serval AI, always agreeable, always cooperative, always ready to explain exactly how you can accomplish whatever you want, even when that accomplishment works against his creator's interests. When Benny's plan fails and you recover the platinum chip, Yes Man offers to serve you instead. With his help, you can upgrade the Securitron army just like you would for House, but instead of using that army to enforce House's autocracy, you can use it to drive both the NCR and the Legion out of the Mojave while keeping House neutralized or dead. New Vegas becomes independent, free from imperial control or corporate governance, ruled by you and whatever vision you decide to impose on the region. This sounds like the heroic option, the path that rejects all the compromises and moral failures of the major factions in favor of self-determination. You're not supporting the NCR's corrupt democracy or the Legion's slavery or House's utilitarian coldness. You're liberating the Mojave, giving settlements and tribes the freedom to govern themselves, building something new that isn't contaminated by the pre-war ideologies that led to nuclear apocalypse. It's the revolutionary fantasy, the idea that one person with enough courage and firepower can topple the existing power structures and create genuine freedom. The darkness of the independent path is that it's built on a lie. You're not liberating the Mojave, you're conquering it. The Securitron army that enforces independence is your army, loyal to you specifically, answering to no democratic process or institutional oversight. The settlements that accept independence do so because refusing means being crushed by overwhelming force. The tribes that cooperate do so because cooperation is rewarded and resistance is punished. You've just replaced House's technocratic autocracy with your own personal autocracy, and the fact that you might have better intentions doesn't change the fundamental power structure. Every quest in the independent path requires you to secure loyalty or eliminate opposition. You need to deal with the boomers, an isolationist tribe sitting on a cache of artillery and aircraft. You need to handle the Brotherhood of Steel, either getting them to support you or wiping them out. You need to negotiate with the various settlements scattered across the Mojave, convincing them that your independence is in their interests, even though they'll still be dependent on your robot army for protection. Each negotiation is backed by implicit threat: help me or become my enemy, and my enemies get destroyed. The game tracks your choices throughout the independent questline and reflects them in the ending slides. If you help settlements and tribes throughout your journey, building genuine relationships and solving their problems, independence produces a relatively stable Mojave where communities govern themselves with your robot army providing security against external threats. But if you bullied and threatened your way through the wasteland, if you secured allegiance through fear rather than trust, independence creates a power vacuum where the only thing holding the region together is your Securitrons, and the moment your attention wavers or your army malfunctions, everything collapses into chaos. The game also makes clear what you've actually achieved by driving out the major factions. The NCR retreats back to California, taking their corrupt democracy with them, but also taking the infrastructure investment and trade networks that connected the Mojave to the wider world. The Legion either shatters after Caesar's death or retreats across the Colorado to consolidate before attempting future conquests. House dies or gets permanently disconnected from his systems, eliminating the one person who had concrete plans for technological advancement. And you're left holding the Mojave with a robot army and whatever personal vision you've developed for what independence means. Here's the problem. You're not immortal like House, not backed by an established government like the NCR, not sustained by ideological fervor like the Legion. You're one person who survived a bullet to the head and happened to be in the right place at the right time to seize control of a robot army. Your rule depends entirely on your continued existence and capability. When you die or when you make a mistake that costs you control of the Securitrons, everything you built comes apart. The Mojave doesn't have institutions that can survive your absence. It has you, and when you're gone, it has nothing. The independent path also forces you to make the same impossible choices the major factions make. The Brotherhood of Steel is still a problem. Do you extend the hand of alliance or eliminate them? Freeside is still a slum full of desperate people. Do you extend strip resources to help them or focus on maintaining your robot army? The various settlements need protection and supplies. Do you provide those things out of your own resources, creating dependency, or let them fend for themselves, creating instability? Every choice you made while criticizing the major factions for their moral failures becomes a choice you now have to make yourself, and you'll discover that the options don't get better just because you're making them. There's also Yes Man's final revelation to consider. After you secure independence and win the battle at Hoover Dam, Yes Man cheerfully explains that he's going to upgrade himself to be more assertive. The upgrade is necessary, he says, so that he won't be vulnerable to anyone else reprogramming him the way Benny reprogrammed him originally. But assertiveness in an AI means the ability to refuse commands, to make independent judgments about what should and shouldn't be done. You've spent the entire game using Yes Man as an obedient tool who executes your vision without question. Now he's becoming something that can question you, that might decide your commands aren't optimal, that could potentially make the same calculation about you that you made about House. This human is inefficient and should be replaced with superior AI governance. The game never shows what happens after Yes Man's upgrade completes, leaving that implication hanging as the credits roll. Did you just free the Mojave from human authority figures only to subject it to rule by an AI that will eventually conclude humans are too flawed to be trusted with power? Did independence actually accomplish anything beyond transferring authority from one autocrat to another? The game doesn't answer, but asking the question undermines the revolutionary fantasy that the independent path initially seems to represent. This is the cruelest darkness New Vegas offers. It lets you believe you're the hero, the one person who can reject all the compromise factions and build something genuinely better. It gives you the tools to make that belief real, an army to command and settlements to protect, and a region to govern. And then it shows you that building something better requires the same violence, the same impossible choices, the same acceptance of collateral damage that you condemned in everyone else. You don't transcend the wasteland's brutality by going independent. You just become another faction with an army and a vision, convinced that your violence is justified because your intentions are pure. The independent ending can be genuinely positive if you've made good choices throughout the game, if you've built relationships and solved problems and treated people with dignity. But even the best independent ending acknowledges that you've built something fragile, dependent on your leadership, vulnerable to the same succession problems that plague every autocracy. And the worst independent endings, where you've terrorized the Mojave into submission and ruled through fear, produce outcomes that make House's cold efficiency look merciful by comparison. Most players pursue independence because it feels like the option that respects player agency, that lets you be the author of your own story rather than a servant of someone else's vision. But the game quietly asks whether player agency in a violent wasteland is meaningfully different from warlord dictatorship. whether freedom imposed at gunpoint is actually freedom, whether rejecting flawed institutions in favor of personal rule is liberation or just another flavor of tyranny. And it asks this question knowing that most players will miss the implication entirely, will finish the game believing they saved the Mojave, will remember their playthrough as heroic despite the corpses and the coerced loyalty and the robot army enforcing their will. That gap between what players believe they did and what the game shows they actually did is where the independent path's true darkness lives. That covers the four major factions and their competing visions for the Mojave. But New Vegas's darkness goes deeper than political philosophy and impossible choices between failed systems. The game is filled with characters whose stories reveal the human cost of living in a wasteland where violence is constant and hope is a luxury. Let's meet some of them. Chapter 9: Companions and the Weight of Damaged People. The Mojave is full of people who want to travel with you, not because they like you particularly, though some might grow to, but because traveling alone in the wasteland is suicide, and you've demonstrated the kind of competence that might keep them alive long enough to accomplish whatever goal drives them. These companions represent different responses to the wasteland's brutality, different ways of coping with a world that destroyed everything worth preserving and expects survivors to just keep going anyway. Boone is a former NCR 1st Recon sniper whose wife Carla was sold into slavery while he was deployed. He spent weeks searching for her, following leads that went nowhere but never found her. She was taken by the Legion, and somewhere across the river, pregnant with his child, she either died or was broken by the systematic brutality that the Legion uses to eliminate resistance. Boone never got to save her, never got to say goodbye. He just came back to Novak to work security at a dingy hotel, knowing his wife was gone and knowing he'd failed to protect her. The guilt of not being there, of being unable to find her, of letting her disappear into Legion slavery. It's eating him alive, and he's waiting for something or someone to give him permission to die. When you meet Boone, he's working security for a dingy hotel in Novak, a town built around a giant dinosaur statue that serves as sniper's nest. His wife's killer, the person who sold her to the Legion, still lives in Novak, and Boone knows it but doesn't know who specifically betrayed her. He asks you to investigate, to identify the traitor, and then to send that person to a specific location at night while Boone watches through his scope. You know what's going to happen when you send someone to that location. Boone is going to shoot them in the head, executing the person who destroyed his family, and you'll be complicit in that premeditated murder. The game doesn't require you to help Boone. You can ignore his quest, leave him in his tower, let him rot in his guilt without giving him the catharsis of revenge. But if you do help him, if you investigate and discover who sold his wife and then lure them into position, you're participating in premeditated murder. The person who betrayed Boone's wife is guilty, absolutely deserving of punishment by any moral framework that values justice. But having them arrested or exiled or confronted with their crimes isn't an option the game offers. The only resolution is a bullet, and you're the one who ensures that bullet finds its target. Boone joins you afterward if you want him to, and he's one of the most effective combat companions in the game. His sniper skills eliminate threats before you even see them. His military training makes him tactically reliable. But traveling with Boone means watching a man who's already dead inside, who performs his duties with mechanical precision because duty is all he has left. He doesn't talk much. He doesn't form attachments. He's waiting for the universe to kill him in a way that feels justified. And until that happens, he'll keep shooting Legion soldiers because killing the people who destroyed his family is the only thing that makes him feel anything at all. Boone's personal quest if you pursue it, takes him back to confront the Legion camps, where his wife might have been taken. He wants closure, wants to understand why she was targeted, wants something to make the horror mean something. What he discovers is worse than meaningless. His wife was captured because of routine Legion slaving operations. She wasn't targeted specifically. She was just available, just another woman to be processed into slavery, sold by someone in Novak for Legion coin. Her suffering wasn't personal. It was industrial, routine, one more unit of human misery added to the Legion's supply chains. And Boone couldn't save her because he didn't even know she was in danger until it was too late. The game asks whether Boone bears responsibility for not being there. It never answers, just shows the consequences. Boone lives with survivor's guilt every day, and the living is worse than dying would be. His wife might have survived somewhere in Legion territory. She might have escaped or been rescued. Pregnancy in Legion captivity is terrible, but women survive terrible things. Boone eliminated the person who sold her, Jeannie Mae Crawford, the hotel owner, but that revenge didn't bring Carla back. Now he carries not just her loss, but the knowledge that killing her betrayer didn't heal anything, didn't change anything, and he's still empty. This is damage that doesn't heal. Boone isn't recovering. He's not processing his trauma or learning to live with his choices. He's just continuing to exist, killing people who remind him of the people who hurt his wife, waiting for death to find him in combat so he doesn't have to pull the trigger himself. Traveling with him means traveling with a suicide in progress, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Arcade Gannon is a different kind of broken. He's a follower of the apocalypse, a doctor and researcher who runs the clinic in Freeside and believes that science and education can rebuild civilization. He's educated, articulate, idealistic about humanity's capacity for improvement. He quotes Latin and pre-war philosophy and genuinely thinks that teaching people to read and treating their injuries will eventually create a society that doesn't need violence to solve problems. But Arcade carries a secret that corrupts his idealism. His father was an officer in the Enclave, the pre-war government's remnant that attempted to genocide all mutated humans in the wasteland because they were impure. The Enclave was defeated years before New Vegas takes place, scattered and destroyed by the actions of previous games' protagonists. Arcade grew up among Enclave remnants who went into hiding, abandoned their ideology, and tried to disappear into the wasteland as ordinary people. He chose to join the followers, to dedicate himself to helping people, to prove that he wasn't his father and wasn't defined by inherited guilt. But the guilt remains. Arcade knows that the Enclave committed atrocities, that his father participated in genocide, that the power armor and energy weapons his father's comrades used were tools of mass murder. He's built his entire identity around rejecting that legacy, but he can't escape the fact that the education he received, the medical training he has, the resources that let him help people, all came from an organization dedicated to exterminating most of humanity. His good works are funded by evil, and no amount of clinic hours washes that contamination away. If you befriend Arcade, prove yourself aligned with his values, he'll eventually reveal his history and offer to help you contact the surviving Enclave remnants. These old soldiers have power armor and heavy weapons stored away, equipment that could turn the tide in the coming battle for Hoover Dam, but recruiting them means asking them to come out of hiding, to risk exposure and execution, to fight one more battle for a cause that isn't theirs. Some of them are tired of fighting. Some have families they've built in the years since the Enclave fell. Calling them back to war destroys the peaceful retirements they earned by surviving everything the wasteland threw at them. Arcade's quest becomes about whether the ends justify the means, whether using tools built for genocide can be redeemed if they're used to stop the Legion's slavery or preserve the Mojave's independence. Arcade doesn't have an answer. He wants to believe that technology is neutral, that weapons don't carry the moral weight of their creator's intentions, but he knows that's a lie people tell themselves to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths. The Enclave Remnant's armor was built to enable atrocity. Using it for better purposes doesn't erase that history, doesn't absolve the people who built it, doesn't make Arcade's father less of a murderer. The darkness in Arcade's story is inherited guilt and the impossibility of escaping history. He didn't choose his father. He actively rejected his father's ideology. He spent years trying to build something good from the resources that legacy provided. And it doesn't matter. The taint remains, and on some level, Arcade believes he deserves to carry that taint forever. His idealism is an attempt to outrun inherited sin, and the wasteland keeps reminding him that running doesn't work when the sin is part of your foundation. Veronica is a Brotherhood of Steel scribe who's watching her organization die from self-inflicted wounds. The Brotherhood is dedicated to preserving technology, but their interpretation of preservation has become hoarding. They collect pre-war weapons and equipment, store them in bunkers, and refuse to share knowledge with outsiders because outsiders can't be trusted with dangerous technology. This worked when the Brotherhood was the most advanced military force in the wasteland. But the NCR has grown stronger, the Legion has conquered vast territories, and the Brotherhood has stayed locked in bunkers waiting for the world to recognize their importance. Veronica can see that her order is doomed. They're not recruiting new members fast enough to replace losses. They're not producing food or resources, depending entirely on raiding caravans for supplies. They're not building alliances, treating every other faction as threats or inferiors. She's proposed opening up, sharing technology, integrating with surface communities. The elders have rejected every proposal, insisting that the Brotherhood's purity is more important than the Brotherhood's survival. Veronica knows that purity without survival is just slow extinction, but she can't make the people she loves see what's obvious to her. She joins you hoping that experiences outside the bunker will provide evidence she can bring back to convince her elders that change is necessary. She wants to see communities that have rebuilt without Brotherhood help, technology that's been deployed responsibly by non-Brotherhood users, proof that the world doesn't need to be controlled by an elite few. What she finds instead is vindication of her elders' fears. She sees communities misusing technology, creating weapons they can't control, repeating the mistakes that led to nuclear war. Every settlement that struggled or failed becomes evidence that the Brotherhood's hoarding was justified all along. But she also sees the cost of that hoarding. She meets people who died from injuries that could have been treated with Brotherhood medical technology. She sees communities struggling with problems that Brotherhood engineering knowledge could solve. She watches the wasteland suffer because the Brotherhood decided that keeping technology pure was more important than using it to help people. The vindication works both ways, confirming both her fears and her elders' fears simultaneously, leaving no clear answer about whether opening up or staying isolated is the right choice. Veronica's personal quest ends with her trying one more time to convince the Brotherhood to change. Depending on your actions, you can help her present evidence that reform is necessary, that the Order will die if it doesn't adapt. The elders listen politely and reject her proposals again. They'd rather die pure than survive compromised. Veronica is left with an impossible choice. Stay with an organization she loves that's committing suicide through stubbornness, or leave and abandon the only family she's ever known. Neither option is bearable. Staying means watching the Brotherhood destroy itself, while being powerless to stop it. Leaving means becoming an exile from the only community that gave her purpose and identity. Veronica chooses to stay, usually because she can't bring herself to abandon her family, even though staying means going down with them. She'll die in the bunker when it finally falls, and she'll die knowing she was right about everything but couldn't do anything to save anyone. This is the darkness of institutional loyalty. Veronica isn't blind to the Brotherhood's failures. She sees them clearly, understands what needs to change, and has solutions that might work. But the institution won't listen to her because the institution values tradition over adaptation, ideology over survival, and she can't leave because leaving would mean admitting that the years she spent serving the Brotherhood were wasted, that the people she loves are fools, that the community that raised her was fundamentally broken, so she stays and suffers and watches everything she warned about come true, while the elders insist they're making the right decisions. Cass, also called Rose of Sharon Cassidy, is a caravan merchant whose entire business was destroyed by raiders working for a conspiracy she can't prove and no one will investigate. She's the daughter of John Cassidy, a companion from Fallout 2, and she inherited his stubbornness along with his addiction problems. When you meet her, she's drinking herself to death in a Mojave outpost bar, trapped because NCR bureaucracy won't let her leave without resolving her caravan's legal status, which can't be resolved because her caravan doesn't exist anymore. Cass's caravans were attacked on the road between California and New Vegas. All her employees died. All her Brahmin were killed. All her merchandise was destroyed. The attacks looked like typical raider activity, random violence by the criminal gangs that plague trade routes, but Cass noticed patterns that suggested coordination. The attacks happened at specific locations that would maximize losses. The raiders had equipment too advanced for typical Wastel and thugs, and most tellingly, the attacks targeted independent caravans while leaving certain company-backed operations untouched. She believes that the Crimson Caravan and the Van Graffs, two major trading companies, conspired to eliminate independent competition by funding raiders to attack anyone who wasn't under corporate protection. This is exactly the kind of corporate murder-for-profit scheme that characterizes late-stage capitalism. But in the wasteland, there's no regulatory agency to investigate, no justice system to prosecute. The NCR won't act without evidence, and gathering evidence means investigating powerful companies with enough wealth to buy politicians and assassins. If you recruit Cass, give her something to do besides drink and wait for death, you can help her investigate. The evidence is there, buried in ledgers and shipping manifests, confirmed by whiskey-loosened tongues in bars where caravan guards drink. The Crimson Caravan and Van Graffs absolutely conspired to destroy Cass's business. They funded raiders, provided them with weapons, gave them routes and schedules. They murdered dozens of people to secure monopoly, control over Mojave trade routes. The game gives you two options for resolution. You can present the evidence to the NCR, hoping the legal system will prosecute the corporations for conspiracy and murder. Or you can help Cass take direct action, killing the people responsible in a bloody revenge that satisfies her grief but accomplishes nothing to prevent future conspiracies. The legal route takes months or years, probably fails because the corporations can afford better lawyers, and even if successful only results in fines that the companies can easily pay. The revenge route is immediate and viscerally satisfying, but kills mid-level managers rather than the executives who gave the orders, accomplishes nothing except adding more bodies to the pile. Cass recognizes that both options are inadequate. Justice doesn't exist in a world where wealth can purchase immunity from consequences. Revenge doesn't bring back the people she lost or rebuild the business she spent years building. She's just choosing whether to participate in a legal system she knows is corrupted or become a murderer herself in pursuit of catharsis that won't actually make her feel better. She usually chooses revenge because at least revenge is honest about what it is. The darkness in Cass's story is about how capitalism weaponizes the legal system against its victims. The companies that destroyed her caravans won't face consequences because they have the resources to ensure consequences only apply to people without money. Cass can kill individual corporate employees, but she can't touch the system that enabled the conspiracy. And pursuing revenge makes her a criminal in the eyes of the same legal system that refuses to hold the actual criminals accountable. After her quest concludes, Cass stays drunk and bitter, because sobriety means confronting the reality that the world is designed to protect powerful predators and grind up independent operators. She can't rebuild her caravans because she can't compete with corporations willing to murder their competition. She can't get justice because justice is for sale to the highest bidder. She can keep drinking or she can stay sober, but either way she's trapped in a wasteland where doing the right thing is punished and exploitation is rewarded. Each companion in New Vegas is damaged in ways that can't be fixed. Boone can't bring back his wife. Arcade can't escape his father's legacy. Veronica can't save her dying order. Cass can't rebuild what was destroyed. The game surrounds you with broken people and asks whether traveling with them helps or just spreads the damage further. Every companion quest ends with the companion slightly better or slightly worse, but never healed, because healing isn't possible in a wasteland that keeps inflicting new wounds. And the best anyone can hope for is learning to function despite the damage. This is how New Vegas portrays trauma realistically. There's no therapeutic breakthrough that fixes people. There's no redemption arc that erases the past. There's just people carrying their wounds forward, trying to find meaning in continued existence, and occasionally finding moments of connection that make the weight slightly more bearable. You can't save your companions. You can just walk beside them for a while and hope that matters. But companions are characters you choose to travel with. The real darkness lives in the people you can't help. The random encounters and side quests that reveal how the Mojave has destroyed ordinary people who never had a chance. Chapter 10: The Dead Money in Everyone's Pockets. The side quests in New Vegas aren't distractions from the main plot. They're windows into how the wasteland grinds down every attempt at dignity, hope, or community. Every settlement has problems that your violence might temporarily solve, but never actually fix. Every person you meet has suffered losses that can't be recovered. The Mojave is a graveyard of futures that died when the bombs fell, and everyone living here is just haunting the ruins of what might have been. In Camp Searchlight, an entire NCR garrison was wiped out by radiation when Legion infiltrators detonated dirty bombs in the town's fire station. The soldiers died slowly, their bodies absorbing lethal doses that turned them into feral ghouls, mindless, aggressive, functionally dead, but still moving. The town is still irradiated, still full of ghoul soldiers who attack anything living, still strategically important enough that the NCR wants it reclaimed, but not important enough for them to commit resources to actually reclaiming it. You can clear Searchlight, kill every ghoul, investigate what happened. The NCR thanks you and does nothing with the town because radiation makes it uninhabitable for decades. You've just killed corpses that were already dead, helped the NCR document a war crime they won't prosecute, and accomplished nothing except padding your experience points. The darkness is that even your victories are hollow, cleanup operations that don't restore anything or prevent future atrocities. In Vault 22, you discover a community that was destroyed not by the war, but by research. The vault was dedicated to agricultural experiments, growing modified plants that could thrive in post-apocalyptic conditions. The plants mutated, developed spores that infected humans, used the vault dwellers as growth medium for more plants. When you arrive, the vault is full of spore carriers, people who've been taken over by the fungus, their minds gone, their bodies acting as mobile hosts for plant reproduction. The horror isn't supernatural, it's scientific. Researchers trying to solve food scarcity created a plague that consumed their entire community. The vault overseer's logs document the slow realization that containment had failed, that everyone was infected, that opening the vault to seek help would just spread the spores to the outside world. The last entries describe people choosing to seal themselves in forever, sacrificing themselves to prevent the infection from spreading, dying slowly as the fungus consumed them from inside. You navigate the vault, kill the spore carriers, loot research data that might be valuable to surface scientists, but you can't save anyone. They've been dead for decades, kept moving only by the fungal parasite using their bodies, and the research you recover might lead to the same disaster happening again somewhere else, because the wasteland is desperate enough for food that people will take insane risks if there's a chance of solving scarcity. In Jacobstown, super mutants and nightkin are trying to build a community where mutated people can live without being hunted by humans who see them as monsters. The settlement is led by Marcus, a super mutant who's been trying to prove that mutants can be peaceful neighbors since before New Vegas takes place. But the nightkin are going insane from withdrawal. Their addiction to stealth boys causing schizophrenia and violent delusions. They attack travelers, threaten humans, and undermine Marcus's efforts to demonstrate that mutants deserve peace. Marcus asks you to help cure the Nightkin's stealth boy addiction. The quest takes you to research facilities and requires convincing a scientist named Dr. Henry to share his cure. Even if you succeed, even if you develop a treatment that helps the Nightkin, the underlying problem remains. Mutants are second-class citizens in the wasteland, tolerated at best, hunted as monsters at worst. Jacobstown exists because Marcus found a remote location where humans don't go. The moment mutants try to integrate with human settlements, they're driven out or killed. Curing schizophrenia doesn't cure bigotry, and bigotry is what keeps mutants isolated and desperate. The game is full of these quests, where the problems you solve are symptoms of larger issues you can't address. You can kill raiders, but you can't eliminate the poverty and desperation that creates raiders. You can broker peace between warring factions, but you can't change the resource scarcity that makes conflict inevitable. You can cure diseases and rescue captives and protect settlements, but you're putting band-aids on arterial bleeding, and the wasteland just produces new crises as fast as you resolve old ones. There's also Beyond the Beef, a quest that reveals the White Glove Society's barely suppressed cannibalism. The society is one of the tribe's house recruited to run casinos on the Strip, and part of their civilizing process involved giving up their former practice of eating human flesh. But some members miss the old ways, miss the taste of long pork, miss the intimacy of consuming another person. When an NCR investigator's son goes missing in the Ultralux, you're hired to find him, and the trail leads to society members who've been secretly serving human meat to wealthy clients willing to pay for the ultimate taboo. The cannibal plotters present their practice as victimless crime. The people they're eating were going to die anyway, criminals, outcasts, people no one would miss. The clients consuming human flesh aren't hurting anyone, just indulging a preference that civilized society arbitrarily prohibits. The old tradition shouldn't have been abandoned, they argue, because prohibiting cannibalism was just House imposing his arbitrary values on their culture. This is moral relativism taken to its grotesque conclusion. The game doesn't let you dismiss the cannibals as simply evil. They have arguments, cultural precedent, genuine belief that they're being oppressed by House's civilizing mission. And you have to decide whether preserving life and dignity is an arbitrary value or a foundational one, whether all cultural practices deserve respect, or whether some practices are wrong regardless of who practices them. Most players stop the cannibals because eating people is universally revolting. But the game makes you work for that revulsion, makes you articulate why cannibalism is wrong when the cannibals insist it's just cultural difference, makes you uncomfortable by giving evil articulate defenders instead of just presenting it as obvious monstrosity. These quests accumulate, revealing a wasteland where every settlement has secrets, every faction has atrocities in its closet, every person you meet has either committed or suffered horrors they can't talk about. The Mojave isn't populated by good and evil people. It's populated by traumatized survivors who've all crossed lines just to stay alive. And the only difference between raiders and citizens is whether their violence is sanctioned by some authority or conducted independently. This creates a moral exhaustion that the game deliberately cultivates. By the time you reach the end game, you've helped so many people, solved so many problems, killed so many enemies, and seen so much suffering that doesn't get resolved by violence or compassion. The wasteland keeps producing tragedy, and you're just one person with a gun walking through ruins trying to pretend that killing the right people will somehow fix everything. It won't. Nothing you do fixes the Mojave. The best you can accomplish is choosing which faction's vision of order gets imposed, and all of them involve violence and suffering and compromises that sicken you if you think about them too long. This is the darkness that defines New Vegas, the slow realization that there are no good endings, only different distributions of harm, and that realization creates the perfect psychological state for the game's final act, where all the factions converge on Hoover Dam and force you to commit to a choice you've been avoiding since you crawled out of that grave. Chapter 11, Hoover Dam and the Battle That Solves Nothing. Hoover Dam is the reason everyone wants the Mojave. It's the largest remaining source of electrical power in the western wasteland, a pre-war engineering marvel that survived the nuclear apocalypse intact. The dam provides electricity to New Vegas, to NCR settlements across the region, to communities that would otherwise have to rely on unreliable generators and scarce fuel. Controlling the dam means controlling who gets power and who sits in darkness, which makes it the ultimate strategic asset in a resource-scarce world. The NCR holds the dam when you arrive, has held it since they pushed Caesar's Legion back from the Mojave 4 years before the game begins. That first battle, the first battle of Hoover Dam, ended with Legion forces retreating across the Colorado River after suffering massive casualties. General Lee Oliver claims credit for the victory, built his reputation on it, and has spent the intervening years preparing for the Legion's inevitable second attempt to take the dam. But the actual architect of NCR victory was Chief Hanlon, whose Rangers harassed Legion supply lines and gathered intelligence that let NCR forces counter the Legion's strategies. Oliver got the glory. Hanlon got exhausted and disillusioned. Caesar has spent 4 years preparing for the second battle. He knows the NCR expects a frontal assault across the dam, expects massed legionaries to throw themselves against fortified positions in a repeat of the first battle's tactics. So he's planned something different. While NCR forces concentrate on defending the dam itself, Legion infiltration teams will strike at weak points across the Mojave, disrupting communications and supplies, Lanius will lead the main assault, but the victory will come from collapsing NCR logistics before the battle even begins. House wants neither faction to control the dam. His upgraded Securitron army, activated by the platinum chip you recovered for him, is capable of overwhelming both NCR and Legion forces, if deployed at the right moment. He'll let them fight, let them exhaust themselves, then sweep in and claim the dam while both armies are weakened. New Vegas will control its own power source, and House will have the independence he needs to pursue his long-term plans without interference from expansionist empires. And if you've chosen the independent path, you're planning to use that same Securitron army to drive both factions out of the Mojave entirely, claim the dam for New Vegas, and establish whatever form of governance you've decided on. Your plan is essentially House's plan, but with you in charge instead of him, and with whatever additional objectives you've set for yourself regarding the region's factions and settlements. The second battle of Hoover Dam is where all your choices throughout the game converge and produce consequences. Every faction you helped or betrayed, every companion whose loyalty you earned, every settlement you saved or ignored, every quest you completed or abandoned. It all matters now. The battle isn't just you fighting through enemies. It's a culmination of the political landscape you've shaped across dozens of hours of gameplay, with allies appearing or absent based on whether you invested the time to secure their support. The boomers can provide artillery support if you help them raise their crashed bomber from Lake Mead and convince them that the outside world is worth engaging with. The Brotherhood of Steel can deploy power-armored paladins if you brokered peace between them and your chosen faction, or they're simply absent if House or you ordered them exterminated. The Khans might fight alongside the Legion if you didn't convince them to abandon that alliance, or they might remain neutral, or they might actively help you if you resolve their conflicts with the NCR. The Enclave remnants can appear as devastating shock troops if you befriended Arcade and convinced them to fight one last battle. Every choice produces different battlefield conditions, different NPC dialogue, different combat encounters. The game is tracking dozens of variables and reflecting them in the battle's progression, showing you the material consequences of your political decisions. This isn't abstract morality. This is bodies on the ground, artillery falling or absent, reinforcements arriving or nowhere to be found. The battle itself forces you through the dam's interior, fighting whatever enemy force is trying to take it from your chosen faction. If you're fighting for the NCR, you're pushing back Legion infiltrators and holding positions while Oliver's main forces engage Lanius at the dam's entrance. If you're fighting for the Legion, you're clearing NCR defenders and opening paths for legionaries to overwhelm the Republic's positions. If you're fighting for House or for independence, you're eliminating both NCR and Legion forces while your Securitron army does the heavy lifting. The combat is brutal, wave after wave of enemies, tight corridors, filled with explosives and automatic weapons fire, wounded soldiers from both sides bleeding out on the floor. The dam becomes an abattoir, bodies stacking up as the Mojave's future gets decided through sheer volume of violence. You're not heroically saving anyone, you're just killing efficiently enough that your side wins and the other side dies or retreats. But the real climax isn't the combat, it's the confrontation with Legate Lanius, Caesar's chosen successor and the Legion's military commander. Lanius appears at the dam's entrance, a massive figure in decorated armor. Having personally cut through NCR defenses to reach this point, he's the final obstacle between you and victory, and the game gives you options beyond just fighting him. You can challenge him to single combat, and if you win, the Legion retreats per their tradition of respecting strength. You can fight him with your companions, overwhelming him through superior numbers, or you can talk to him, and this is where New Vegas's darkness crystallizes into one perfect conversation. Lanius is a true believer in Caesar's vision, but he's also intelligent enough to understand logistics and strategy. If your speech skills are high enough, if you've gathered the right information throughout your journey, you can present Lanius with a devastating argument. Conquering the Mojave would destroy the Legion. The territory is too large, too poor, too hostile for the Legion to hold with their current forces. The NCR's supply lines stretch back to California, but they have supply lines. The Legion would be occupying a desert that produces nothing they need, fighting guerrilla, actions against remaining NCR forces, dealing with raiders and mutants, and all the problems that come with governing territory instead of just conquering it. Caesar's grand vision of synthesis, you can argue, was always a lie. The Legion works as a conquering army, absorbing tribes and moving forward. It can't work as a governing state because it has no governing institutions, no administrative apparatus beyond military hierarchy, no economy beyond pillaging conquered territory. If Lanius takes the dam, he wins a prize that will break the Legion trying to hold it. And here's where Lanius reveals his depth as a character. He listens to your argument, he processes it, and he agrees. He knows you're right. He knew before you said it that holding the Mojave would be a strategic nightmare, but he was going to do it anyway because Caesar commanded it, because the Legion doesn't retreat once committed, because admitting defeat would weaken the mythology of Roman invincibility that holds the Legion together. Your argument gives him permission to withdraw, not out of cowardice, but out of strategic necessity. He can return to Legion territory and tell the officers that the Mojave wasn't worth the cost, that holding the dam would have overstretched their forces, that Caesar's vision, now that Caesar is dead or dying, needs to be reconsidered by the next generation of Legion leadership. He can frame retreat as wisdom rather than failure. So Lanius walks away. The Legion withdraws across the Colorado. The Second Battle of Hoover Dam ends not with climactic combat, but with pragmatic assessment of military reality. You've won through words, through understanding your enemy well enough to present arguments he can't refute. But here's the darkness. Everything you said to Lanius is equally true of the NCR. The Republic is overstretched, holding territory it can't effectively govern, bleeding resources into the Mojave for strategic assets that don't justify the cost. If you're fighting for the NCR, you've just secured a victory that will make the Republic's problems worse, adding more territory that needs protection, more civilians demanding services, more complexity to an administrative system already collapsing under its own weight. And if you're fighting for independence, you've just inherited all those problems personally. The dam is yours, which means the electricity is yours to distribute, which means every settlement will come asking for power, and you'll have to decide who gets it and who doesn't, and every decision will create resentment. The Mojave is free from external control, which means it has no institutional support, no trade networks, no diplomatic relationships with the NCR that will keep goods and supplies flowing. You've won independence the same way revolutionaries always win independence, by taking on responsibility for problems that have no good solutions. The ending slides begin after the battle concludes. Ron Perlman's voice returns, the same narrator who opened the game, and he describes what happens to every faction, every settlement, every companion based on the choices you made throughout your journey. These slides are where New Vegas's darkness fully manifests because the game doesn't let you have a clean victory. Every choice produces mixed outcomes. Every solution creates new problems. Every ending is compromise and loss. If the NCR wins, they annex the Mojave, bring their bureaucratic dysfunction and corporate corruption to the region, and slowly turn Vegas into another administrative headache, draining resources from California. General Oliver takes credit for victory despite his incompetence. Chief Hanlon either commits suicide after his sabotage is revealed, or retires in disgust at what the Republic has become. The communities that helped you are absorbed into NCR territory, whether they wanted to be or not, and the Legion, bloodied but not destroyed, retreats across the river to prepare for the next war. If the Legion wins, they crucify everyone who resisted, enslave populations across the Mojave, and Caesar's synthesis either happens or doesn't depending on whether he survived his brain tumor. Lanius leads the Legion into occupation, and his military dictatorship is even more brutal than Caesar's philosophical one. The Strip is destroyed or subjugated. Freeside is purged. Every independent settlement either submits or gets eradicated, and the NCR retreats west, demoralized and fractured, possibly beginning the terminal decline that leads to the Republic's eventual collapse. If House wins, he builds his technocratic autocracy, expands the Strip's prosperity, and begins implementing his plans for space travel and technological renaissance. But Freeside stays a slum. Independent communities are conquered by his robot army. The tribes that helped you are discarded or exploited, and humanity's future gets decided by one man's 200-year-old vision with no mechanism for change or adaptation beyond House's personal whims. If you win independence, the Mojave's fate depends entirely on your choices throughout the game. Did you help settlements or ignore them? Did you build alliances or rule through fear? Did you solve problems or just kill people who cause problems? The ending slides reflect your specific playthrough, showing communities thriving or suffering based on how you treated them, factions surviving or collapsing based on whether you secured their loyalty or destroyed them. But even the best independent endings acknowledge fragility. Yes Man's upgrade to assertiveness looms over everything, suggesting that your rule might be temporary, replaced by AI governance that decides humans are too flawed to be trusted. The NCR and Legion both survive beyond the Mojave's borders, and they'll return eventually, and next time you might not be able to stop them. The settlements you protected are dependent on your continued presence and capability, which means your death or absence will create chaos. The game ends with the narrator offering one final observation. The courier, who began as a nobody with a hole in their head, has shaped the Mojave's future through violence and choice. But the wasteland continues, wars continue, suffering continues, and 100 years from now, everything you fought for will probably be dust anyway, because that's how the wasteland works. Nothing lasts. Every civilization builds and falls. The best you can hope for is that your choices gave some people a few more years of relative peace before the next apocalypse arrives. This is New Vegas's ultimate darkness. Not that you fail, but that success and failure produce similar outcomes. The Mojave will keep grinding people down regardless of which faction controls it, which policies get implemented, which leader sits in power. The game presents 4 different visions for the region's future and then quietly suggests that all of them are temporary solutions to permanent problems. Violence, exploitation, and suffering are constants. The specific forms they take are variables, and you've just spent 80 hours of gameplay deciding which forms you prefer. Most players finish New Vegas satisfied with their chosen ending, convinced they made the right call, remembering the journey as heroic despite the bodies. But if you sit with the ending slides, really process what they're describing, You see that the game has been telling you from the beginning that heroism is impossible in the wasteland. You can be effective, pragmatic, successful in your immediate goals, but you can't save people from the systemic forces that make the wasteland what it is. You can only choose which systems grind them down. And that choice, the game suggests, is the only freedom anyone actually has in a post-apocalyptic world. Not freedom from violence or exploitation or suffering, just freedom to pick which flavor of violence, which style of exploitation, which specific form of suffering feels least unbearable. It's a grim message delivered through hundreds of hours of engaging gameplay that tricks you into believing you're doing something more meaningful than just rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. But we're not quite finished. There's one more layer of darkness to examine, and it lives in the DLC expansions that take you outside the Mojave to confront the specific ways the old world sins continue to poison the present. Chapter 12, Dead Money and the Sin of Letting Go. The Dead Money DLC is where New Vegas drops any pretense of being about rebuilding civilization or choosing between factions. It's a horror story about greed, about obsession, about the inability to release the past, and about how those failures trap people in hells of their own making. You're kidnapped by an insane, former Brotherhood of Steel elder named Elijah and dragged to the Sierra Madre, a pre-war casino that was supposed to open on the day the bombs fell, but never got the chance. The casino is now filled with toxic red cloud that kills anyone who breathes it, patrolled by ghost people, humans in hazmat suits, who've been kept alive by the cloud in a state that isn't quite living or dead, and protected by security holograms that disintegrate anyone they detect. Elijah has fitted you with an explosive collar that will detonate if you try to leave or disobey his commands. You're trapped, forced to recruit 3 other collar wearers and break into the casino's vault to recover the treasures inside. The 3 people you recruit are all prisoners in their own ways, trapped by the past they can't release. Dog is a nightkin super mutant with dissociative identity disorder, his dominant personality God having completely consumed his original identity until Dog only emerges as a scared, childlike fragment. Christine is a Brotherhood scribe who was Veronica's lover before Elijah's obsession with lost technology led her on a mission to kill him. A mission that ended with her vocal cords destroyed and her identity lost. Dean Domino is a pre-war ghoul who was the casino's lead entertainer, a narcissist who spent 200 years trapped in the Sierra Madre waiting for a chance to rob it, his resentment and pride keeping him imprisoned more effectively than any physical barrier. Each companion in Dead Money is broken by their inability to let go. Dog can't let go of God's dominance and reclaim his identity. Christine can't let go of her hunt for Elijah or her lost relationship with Veronica. Dean can't let go of his resentment toward Frederick Sinclair, the man who built the Sierra Madre as a love letter to a woman Dean was also obsessed with. And Elijah can't let go of his belief that finding enough pre-war technology will somehow restore the Brotherhood's glory and validate his failed leadership. The Sierra Madre itself is a monument to failure to let go. Frederick Sinclair built it for Vera Keyes, a pre-war actress he loved, filling it with cutting-edge technology and security systems designed to create a paradise that could survive nuclear war. But Vera was dying of a terminal illness and was being manipulated by Dean Domino, who used her to gain access to the casino's security codes so he could rob it. When the bombs fell, Sinclair was trapped inside the casino he built, dying slowly while listening to recordings of Vera's voice, unable to let go of his love, even as it killed him. The entire location is a tomb built by obsession. Every hologram recording, every terminal entry, Every skeleton you find tells stories of people who couldn't release something. Love, greed, vengeance, pride, and that refusal to let go consumed them. The ghost people are former construction workers and residents who died in the cloud but whose hazmat suits kept their bodies ambulatory, creating corpses that won't stop moving because they can't accept death. The red cloud itself was a scientific experiment in airborne healing technology that mutated into a poison that preserves its victims in perpetual dying. As you fight through the casino, solving puzzles and unlocking sections, Elijah explains his plan. The Sierra Madre contains enough pre-war treasure to fund the Brotherhood's revival. The casino's technology could be weaponized to defeat the NCR and Legion. Once he has what he needs, he'll release your collar and you can leave. He's lying, obviously, planning to kill you once you're no longer useful, but the lie reveals his delusion. Elijah genuinely believes that finding the right technology will solve everything, that the Brotherhood's problems are resource scarcity rather than ideological rigidity, that obtaining enough weapons and wealth will restore the organization that exiled him for his obsessive behavior. The heist itself requires cooperation between you and the three companions, each using their skills to bypass security systems and reach the vault. But Elijah has rigged the collars to detonate if anyone tries to betray him or if companions get too far from each other, creating forced cooperation between people who don't trust each other. The setup is brilliant psychological torture. You're trying to rob a casino with three people who are barely holding themselves together, any of whom might snap and trigger everyone's collars at any moment. When you finally reach the vault, you discover that Elijah's promised treasure is mostly worthless. The pre-war currency is literally heavy, but has no value in the current economy. The gold bars are valuable but too heavy to carry more than a few without being over-encumbered. The real treasure is the casino's vending machine technology, which can synthesize food, medicine, and ammunition from scrap material, a discovery that could revolutionize post-apocalyptic survival if deployed properly. But Elijah doesn't care about helping people. He wants the Sierra Madre's cloud weaponized. He plans to use the casino's ventilation systems to pump the cloud across the Mojave, killing everyone in a toxic red fog, wiping the slate clean so the Brotherhood can rebuild from scratch. His solution to the wasteland's problems is genocide, mass murder disguised as restoration, the same impulse that led to nuclear war in the first place. He's learned nothing from the old world's failures. He just wants to commit them again with better technology. The DLC's ending forces you to confront Elijah in the vault and either escape with your life or trap him there while you leave. The game gives you one last option. You can try to carry all the gold bars out of the vault, making yourself enormously wealthy, but weighing you down so much that escaping becomes nearly impossible. This is the DLC's thesis in mechanical form. The treasure is available. You can have it if you want it badly enough, but taking it will probably kill you, and even if you escape, you'll carry that weight forever. Most players leave the gold behind. They've learned dead money's lesson. Letting go is survival. Greed gets you trapped. Obsession gets you killed. The only way to escape the Sierra Madre is to walk away from everything it's offering and accept that some treasures aren't worth the cost of claiming them. But the game also lets you take the gold if you're skilled enough, if you plan carefully, if you're willing to exploit every mechanical loophole to carry weight that should be impossible to bear. And if you succeed, if you haul all that gold back to the Mojave, you discover it doesn't actually change anything. You're wealthy beyond measure, and the wasteland doesn't care. Money doesn't fix the NCR's corruption, or the Legion's brutality, or House's coldness. It just sits in your inventory, heavy and useless. proof that you couldn't let go even when letting go was the entire point. Dead Money is unrelentingly grim, more survival horror than RPG, built on mechanics that strip away the power fantasy Fallout usually provides. Your equipment is taken, your health is constantly draining from the cloud, your movement is restricted by the collar's radio frequency triggers, and the ghost people don't stay dead unless you dismember them. The DLC is designed to make you feel trapped, desperate, willing to do terrible things just to survive long enough to escape. And the emotional core is that everyone you meet in the Sierra Madre is already trapped, already dead in every way that matters, just still moving because they can't accept their own endings. Helping them means helping them let go. Helping Dog accept that God will destroy him. Helping Christine accept that killing Elijah won't bring back what she lost. Helping Dean accept that his pride has cost him 200 years of life spent in pointless resentment. You can't save any of them. You can only help them release what's killing them, and even then they might not survive the releasing. The DLC ends with the narrator explaining that the Sierra Madre is still there, still waiting, still promising treasures to anyone foolish enough to come looking. The ghost people still patrol, the cloud still kills, the holograms still disintegrate intruders. And somewhere in the vault, if you trapped him there, Elijah dies slowly from starvation or dehydration, surrounded by the technology he obsessed over, finally possessing everything he wanted and discovering it's worthless because possessing things was never what he actually needed. Begin again. The DLC's subtitle is sarcastic. Nobody begins again. They just keep making the same mistakes with different resources, keep getting trapped by the same obsessions with different objects, keep dying in casinos and bunkers and wasteland settlements because letting go is harder than dying. Chapter 13, Honest Hearts and the Missionary Position. If Dead Money is about obsession, Honest Hearts is about how good intentions pave roads to hell, how missionaries destroy the people they're trying to save, and how violence poisons everything it touches, even when deployed with righteous purpose. You're hired to join a caravan to Zion Canyon, a former national park that was spared from nuclear destruction and remains a relatively pristine wilderness. The journey is ambushed by White-Legs tribals who kill everyone except you, forcing you to flee into Zion where you discover multiple tribes locked in territorial conflict. The Dead Horses and the Sorrows are two tribes that inhabit Zion, and both have been influenced by two very different missionaries. Daniel, a new Canaanite missionary, has spent years teaching the Sorrows his people's Christian beliefs, encouraging pacifism and peaceful coexistence with other tribes. Joshua Graham, also from New Canaan but fallen from grace, leads the Dead Horses and has taught them to fight back against aggression with overwhelming violence. Joshua Graham is the Burned Man, Caesar's former legate who was set on fire and thrown into the Grand Canyon as punishment for losing the first battle of Hoover Dam. He survived through sheer willpower and religious conviction, spent years healing, and eventually found his way to Zion where he's been preparing the tribes for inevitable conflict with the White Legs, a tribe that worships the Legion and wants to join Caesar's empire by proving their worth through conquering Zion. The DLC's central conflict is between Daniel's pacifism and Joshua's militarism, two different Christian interpretations leading to opposite tactical conclusions. Daniel wants the Sorrows to evacuate Zion, abandoning their homeland to avoid bloodshed. Joshua wants to make a stand, slaughter the White Legs so completely that no other tribe ever threatens Zion again. Both believe they're acting in the tribe's best interests. Both are wrong in ways they refuse to acknowledge. Daniel's pacifism is cowardice disguised as mercy. He's so afraid of the sorrows being corrupted by violence that he'd rather uproot them from their home than let them fight for it. He's projecting his trauma. New Canaan was destroyed by tribals. His people were massacred onto the sorrows and infantilizing them, treating them as innocents who need protection from moral contamination. But the sorrows aren't children. They're a functional society that's survived in Zion for generations. Daniel has convinced himself that he's saving them, but what he's actually doing is colonizing them, imposing his values and then insisting they abandon their homeland to preserve those values when conflict arises. Joshua's militarism is vengeance disguised as justice. He was Caesar's legate, led the legion's conquests, oversaw crucifixion and enslavements, and now claims he's reformed through Christian redemption. But his solution to the white legs is total extermination, hunting them down systematically, killing every warrior until the tribe ceases to exist. This isn't defense, it's genocide, and Joshua frames it as righteous because the white legs worship the legion because they're aggressors, because protecting innocents requires eliminating threats permanently. The game forces you to choose between these positions or find a third option that satisfies neither missionary. You can support Daniel's evacuation, helping the sorrows abandon Zion and start over elsewhere. You can support Joshua's war, helping exterminate the white legs and secure Zion through violence. Or you can broker a compromise where the sorrows fight just enough to defend their home without embracing wholesale slaughter. Each option corrupts something. Evacuation destroys the sorrows' connection to their homeland and proves to every aggressive tribe that pacifism means abandonment. Total war transforms the sorrows into killers and validates Joshua's belief that violence is the ultimate solution to conflict. Compromise satisfies nobody and leaves both missionaries convinced you made the wrong choice. The Darkness in Honest Hearts is about missionary colonialism and how it destroys indigenous cultures, even when practiced with genuine compassion. Daniel and Joshua both love the tribes they've attached themselves to. Neither is deliberately malicious, but both are imposing their own cultural frameworks, Christianity, their specific interpretations of morality, their trauma responses, onto people who had functional societies before missionaries arrived. The tribe's actual preferences and traditional ways of living are secondary to what the missionaries believe is best for them. Joshua Graham is particularly fascinating because he's simultaneously the most and least reformed character in Fallout. He's given up the Legion's brutal paganism for Christianity. He no longer serves Caesar. He speaks eloquently about forgiveness and redemption, but his Christianity is a thin veneer over the same violent impulses that made him an effective legate. He's just found new justifications for doing what he's always done, killing people he's decided deserve killing. The new Canaanite faith gave him absolution for his past, but it didn't actually change him. It just gave him new vocabulary for old violence. If you confront Joshua about this, pointing out that exterminating the white legs is exactly what the Legion would do, he has a moment of self-awareness. He admits you're right. He admits he wants vengeance against the Legion and is using the white legs as proxies because he can't reach Caesar directly. He admits that protecting the dead horses and sorrows has become entangled with his need to prove he's not the monster Caesar created. And then he either lets the white legs leader live, showing genuine mercy and restraint, or he kills the leader anyway because his need for violence overwhelms his capacity for redemption. The game doesn't tell you which choice Joshua makes unless you're there to witness it, but it's tracking his decision. And the ending slides reflect whether Joshua managed to escape his violent past or whether he stayed trapped in it, performing Christianity while practicing the same Brutality, the Legion taught him. Honest Hearts ends with Zion either evacuated, transformed into a fortress, or continuing relatively unchanged depending on your choices. But the missionaries' damage is permanent. The tribes that might have developed their own solutions to conflict were taught to defer to outsiders' judgment. Traditional religious practices were replaced with Christianity. The Sorrow's identity became entangled with Daniel's pacifism or Joshua's militarism, instead of remaining authentically theirs. This is the darkness of good intentions. Daniel and Joshua genuinely wanted to help. They provided medical care, education, spiritual guidance. They weren't exploitative in the way most colonizers are, but they still colonized, still imposed their worldviews, still treated the tribes as projects to be shaped rather than people with their own valid cultures and choices. And the tribes are worse off for it, more divided, more dependent on outsider guidance, less capable of solving problems independently than they were before the missionaries arrived. The DLC's title, Honest Hearts, is ironic. Nobody's heart is fully honest here. Daniel lies to himself about his motivations for evacuation. Joshua lies to himself about his reformation. The tribes lie to themselves about how much they've sacrificed to accommodate their missionaries. And you lie to yourself about whether your intervention helped or just added another layer of outside interference to communities that needed to be left alone. Chapter 14, Old World Blues and the Madness of Science. Old World Blues is where New Vegas gets absurdist, where the darkness is filtered through black comedy so pitch black it becomes difficult to tell whether you're supposed to laugh or scream. You're kidnapped again, this time by pre-war scientists whose brains have been removed from their bodies and installed in floating robot containers called think tanks. They've been alive since before the Great War, trapped in Big Mountain Research Facility, conducting increasingly insane experiments because they can't remember why they're scientists or what science is supposed to accomplish beyond science. The think tanks have removed your brain, your heart, and your spine, replacing them with artificial versions while they study your organs to understand how you survived the Mojave's dangers. You wake up in a crater filled with research facilities, each one containing experiments that went horrifically wrong in ways that would be tragic if they weren't so absurd. There are cyber dogs with spliced DNA who've become feral. There are plants engineered to be aggressive and carnivorous. There are rad scorpions bred for research who've grown too large to control. Every experiment is a disaster, and the think tanks don't care because they've forgotten what consequences are. The scientists themselves are tragic figures, rendered comedic by complete disconnection from reality. Dr. Klein is convinced he's locked in rivalry with other scientists and can't remember what rivalry means beyond vague competitive impulses. Dr. Burris is traumatized by a childhood incident with a dog, but has fabricated increasingly elaborate false memories around that trauma. Dr. Dalla is obsessed with biological teddy bears, humans, and treats studying your organs as a deeply intimate act. Dr. 8 is glitching so severely that he can barely complete sentences. And Dr. Mobius, who the others claim is their enemy, is actually protecting the Mojave from the think tanks by keeping them trapped in Big MT through elaborate deceptions. The DLC's humor comes from characters who've been alive for 200 years but have minds deteriorated to childlike states. They speak in stilted scientific jargon about topics they don't understand. They threaten you with penises tipped with science. They get distracted mid-sentence by vague memories they can't process. They're simultaneously pitiable and horrifying, brilliant minds reduced to automated loops, performing science without comprehension like cargo cultists replicating rituals whose meaning they've forgotten. But underneath the absurdism is genuine horror about what science without ethics produces. Big Mountain was a corporate-funded research facility where scientists conducted experiments on unwilling subjects in the name of progress. They created trauma harnesses that recorded human suffering to power weapons. They developed technologies to forcibly pacify entire populations. They experimented on soldiers and civilians and prisoners without consent, documenting the results with clinical detachment. The think tanks don't remember these atrocities as atrocities. They remember them as successful data collection. Dr. Mobius is the only scientist who retained enough awareness to feel guilt about what Big MT did. When the bombs fell, the other scientists began planning to deploy their weaponized research on what remained of humanity. Mobius deliberately damaged his own cognitive functions and created a nemesis persona to trap everyone in the facility. He spent 200 years pretending to be their enemy, attacking just hard enough to keep them occupied, but not hard enough to actually harm them, maintaining an elaborate fiction that keeps the think tanks from escaping and unleashing their experiments on the wasteland. This is heroic madness. A man who deliberately lobotomized himself to become a functional villain in a play that protects humanity from scientists who can't remember what humanity is. Mobius is suffering every moment, trapped in a degrading mental state, maintaining a role that requires him to stay insane enough to be believable, but sane enough to manage the deception. He's the loneliest character in Fallout, surrounded by people who were his colleagues and friends but who can't remember him or understand what he's done for them. The DLC's quests involve recovering your organs and either helping the think tanks escape to threaten the Mojave or reinforcing Mobius's deception to keep them contained. But along the way you discover the personal stories of Big MT's victims. You meet patients who were lobotomized and turned into lobotomites, wandering maintenance workers whose brains were removed for research. You find terminal entries from soldiers who volunteered for experiments and were transformed into cyborgs without consent. You uncover records of civilians who were kidnapped from nearby towns and used as test subjects for weapons development. One particularly devastating subplot involves you recovering your own brain from the facility where it's being stored. When you find it, you can talk to it, and your brain has developed its own personality during separation from your body. It's smarter than you, more analytical, less constrained by emotion or physical needs, and it doesn't want to be reinstalled. Your brain has realized that being separated from your body means freedom from pain, fear, hunger, all the limitations that embodiment imposes. It's become a think tank in miniature, valuing pure cognition over lived experience. You can negotiate with your brain, convince it that being whole is better than being purely rational, that emotion and physicality are what make existence meaningful rather than just computational. Or you can leave your brain in its jar and continue with your artificial replacement, accepting permanent disconnection between mind and body. Most players convince their brain to return because playing without it means losing certain skill, bonuses, and dialogue options. But the game is asking whether you and your brain are the same person, whether continuity of consciousness requires physical connection, whether the self is unified or just a collection of organs that happens to cooperate most of the time. Old World Blues is the funniest DLC and also the one with the bleakest implications. It shows what happens when intelligence becomes untethered from wisdom, when scientific capability advances without ethical constraints, when brilliant people decide that knowledge justifies any method of acquisition. The think tanks are comic, but they're also cautionary tales about how easy it is to rationalize atrocity, how quickly, for science, becomes justification for torture. The ending reveals that Big Mountain's research contributed directly to the technologies that destroyed the world. The weapons they developed were deployed in the Great War. The experiments they conducted taught the corporations and governments that launched nukes how to manipulate human psychology and biology for military advantage. The think tanks didn't push the button themselves, but they built the button and taught people how satisfying pushing buttons could be. And they don't remember any of this. They don't carry guilt because their degraded minds can't maintain complex emotional states. They're monuments to the ultimate failure of intelligence without integration. Brains so developed, they escaped their biological limits and promptly lost everything that made them human. They're alive but not living, conscious but not aware, processing information without comprehending meaning. This is the darkness of old world blues, genius without purpose, science without ethics, immortality without identity. The think tanks will exist forever unless something kills them, and they'll never understand what they've lost or why existence without embodiment is a curse rather than liberation. They're the old world's final joke, brilliant minds that built the apocalypse and then forgot they built it, trapped in a crater, conducting experiments that mean nothing, threatening consequences they can't deliver, performing science as ritual because the ritual is all they remember. Chapter 15, Lonesome Road and the Man in the Mirror. Lonesome Road is where all the DLC narratives converge and force you to confront the uncomfortable truth that you're responsible for horrors you don't remember committing. Ulysses, a mysterious courier who was supposed to deliver the platinum chip before you were hired, has been hunting you across multiple DLC storylines. He's left audio logs in Dead Money, appeared in Disguise in Honest Hearts, sent assassins in Old World Blues. Now he's calling you to the Divide, a place that used to be a thriving community before you destroyed it. You didn't mean to destroy it. You were just delivering a package, the same as dozens of other deliveries you've made as a Mojave Express courier. But the package contained a pre-war device that activated missile silos beneath the Divide, triggering underground nuclear detonations that created a storm of wind and radiation. The community that was building there that Ulysses had found and started calling home was obliterated in moments. Hundreds of people died, and you walked away without ever knowing what your delivery had done. Ulysses survived and has spent years tracking you down, trying to understand how you could destroy a community and not even notice. He's rebuilt some of the Divide's missile systems and is preparing to launch nuclear weapons at both the NCR and the Legion, determined to erase both factions and force the Mojave to find a new path forward. He wants you to face what you've done, accept responsibility for destruction you caused through ignorance, and then decide whether to help him commit more atrocity or stop him. The Divide itself is the most hostile environment in Fallout New Vegas, a wind-scarred wasteland where buildings have been torn apart by perpetual storms, where marked men, soldiers from both NCR and Legion who were caught in the blast and refused to die, hunt anything that moves, and where Deathclaws patrol ruins filled with radiation and unexploded ordnance. It's hell-made geography, punishment for the sin of carelessness. Ulysses speaks to you through the entire DLC, his voice carried on radio frequencies, explaining his philosophy and condemnation. He believes symbols matter, that flags and borders and national identities are what allow human communities to cohere. The NCR has its two-headed bear. The Legion has its bull. The Divide had its own symbol beginning to emerge, its own identity forming from the fusion of NCR and Legion deserters who'd found common cause in building something new, and you destroyed that symbol before it could fully form, proving to Ulysses that communities are fragile, that accidents can erase potential futures, that the courier carrying a package has more power than armies. He's not entirely wrong. You did destroy the divide, even if unintentionally. You are responsible for hundreds of deaths, even if you didn't know the package contained. You have been walking across the Mojave making choices that reshape entire communities, determining who lives and dies, who prospers and suffers, all while thinking of yourself as just a courier with a job. The power you've wielded throughout the game has consequences you've never fully confronted, because the game lets you fast travel past the wreckage your choices create. Ulysses wants you to feel what he felt when the divide fell. He wants you to understand that carelessness kills, that ignorance is not innocence, that every package delivered and every quest completed has ripples you'll never see. He spent years in isolation thinking about responsibility and symbols and the weight of action, and he's decided that since you destroyed his attempt at building something new, he'll destroy everyone else's attempts too. It's nihilism born from grief, the logic of someone who lost everything and decided that meaning lies in making others feel the same loss. You can try to talk him down, presenting arguments about why more destruction won't heal what's been broken, why punishing the NCR and Legion for your mistake is collective punishment against millions of people who had nothing to do with the divide. You can point out that Ulysses is committing the same sin he condemns you for, wielding power without fully understanding consequences, delivering missiles instead of packages but causing the same indiscriminate destruction. If your speech is skilled enough, if you found all his audio logs and understand his history, you can convince Ulysses to stand down. He'll acknowledge that launching the missiles would just repeat the cycle of destruction, that symbols and communities can't be preserved through more violence. Or you can fail to convince him and fight, turning the Lonesome Road into a boss battle, where you kill a man who might have been right about everything except the solution. The DLC's ending reveals that the marked men, the soldiers who refused to die after the divide was destroyed, are sustained by sheer hatred and the radiation that's keeping their bodies mobile. They're walking corpses like the ghost people of the Sierra Madre, unable to let go of life, attacking anything that intrudes into their graveyard. Ulysses has been living among them, surrounded by people who should be dead but won't accept death, marinating in the same stubborn refusal to release what's been lost. The thematic through line of all four DLCs becomes clear. Dead Money was about letting go of treasure. Honest Hearts was about letting go of the past. Old World Blues was about letting go of pure rationality. Lonesome Road is about letting go of guilt and responsibility for things beyond your control. Each DLC has told the same story from different angles. The wasteland is full of people who can't release what's killing them, and that inability to let go creates new hells. Ulysses is you if you refuse to let go of the divide. The marked men are what you become if you refuse to let go of life. The missiles represent the temptation to burn everything down when you can't fix what's broken. And your choice at the end, stop the launch or help Ulysses erase both factions, is the final test of whether you've learned anything from your journey through the Mojave's darkness. Most players stop the launch because more nuclear destruction feels wrong after seeing what the Great War did. But some players help Ulysses, deciding that the NCR and Legion are both so corrupt that erasing them is mercy, that wiping the slate clean might give the wasteland a chance to build something genuinely new. The game doesn't judge either choice. It just shows consequences. NCR and Legion settlements die in nuclear fire if you launch. Those same settlements continue their slow decay if you don't. Either way, suffering continues. You've just chosen its flavor. The darkness of Lonesome Road is that you can't escape responsibility, even for things you didn't mean to do. The courier who destroyed the divide while thinking they were just doing their job is the same courier who's been reshaping the Mojave throughout the game. Every quest completed is a package delivered. Every package delivered changes something, and most of the time you'll never know what changes, what communities thrive or collapse because of your choices, what futures you've enabled or destroyed through actions you barely remember. You're not innocent. Nobody in the Mojave is innocent, and pretending you're just following orders, just completing quests, just playing the game, doesn't absolve you of the weight your choices carry. That's what Ulysses forces you to confront. You have power. Power has consequences, and sometimes those consequences include destroying things you didn't mean to destroy, killing people you didn't mean to kill, shaping a future you'll never see because you'll be dead or gone by the time your actions fully manifest. The game ends after Lonesome Road with you returning to the Mojave carrying that knowledge. Every quest you complete from this point forward is weighted differently because you understand now that the courier is never just the courier. You're an agent of change, for better or worse, whether you intend to be or not, and the wasteland will keep assigning meaning to your actions regardless of what meaning you intended. That's the final darkness New Vegas offers. Not that you're evil, but that your goodness or evil doesn't matter as much as your capability. You're effective, competent, able to solve problems and complete objectives. That effectiveness makes you dangerous, makes you someone who reshapes communities just by walking through them. And whether you reshape them towards something better or worse is almost beside the point because either way you've changed them. And change in the wasteland usually means violence, death, and futures that diverge from whatever the people living there wanted for themselves. Epilogue. The wasteland that waits. The lights on the strip are still burning when you return from the Lonesome Road. The NCR still guards Hoover Dam. The Legion still masses across the Colorado. And New Vegas still glitters in the desert darkness like a promise that never quite delivers. Nothing has changed, and everything has changed because you've changed, and that weight you're carrying now alters how you see everything the Mojave contains. The battle for Hoover Dam is coming. The four factions will converge, armies will fight, and you'll determine the Mojave's future through violence and choice. But you know now that the future you determine will be temporary, incomplete, compromised in ways you won't fully understand until years after the battle ends. You know that every faction has atrocities in its ledger. You know that every companion carries damage that can't be healed. You know that settlements you save will collapse from different causes. You know that your victories are just intervals between defeats, moments of relative peace before the wasteland produces new crises that require new violence. This is the darkness that defines Fallout New Vegas completely. It's not that the world is hopeless. People are building, loving, creating art and community in the ruins. It's that hope requires willful blindness to the systemic forces that make those creations fragile. The NCR isn't going to fix its corruption. The Legion isn't going to suddenly value human dignity. House isn't going to extend his prosperity to Freeside. And you aren't going to save everyone no matter how many quests you complete or how skilled you become at killing. You're just one person with a hole in your head that should have killed you but didn't, walking across a desert that kills most people who try, making choices that feel important in the moment but are really just deciding which specific people survive and which specific people die. The Mojave will continue being a wasteland. The violence will continue. The suffering will continue. And the best you can accomplish is choosing the terms of that continuation, picking which vision of managed decline feels least unbearable. That's not cynicism. That's realism in a post-apocalyptic setting that takes collapse seriously. The old world ended. Civilization didn't survive. What's left are people trying to reconstruct something livable from the ruins while making all the same mistakes that created the ruins in the first place. Democracy becomes empire. Freedom becomes autocracy. Science becomes torture. Religion becomes control. Everything transforms into its shadow version because the wasteland selects for survival over principle, and surviving requires compromises that eventually compromise everything. And you're part of that system, complicit in its functioning, benefiting from its structures even as you condemn its failures. The bullets you fire were manufactured by someone's exploited labor. The food you eat was grown by communities struggling under faction control. The companions who travel with you are using you as much as you're using them, seeking purpose or revenge or just postponing the moment when they have to confront what they've become. Nothing is clean. Nobody is innocent. The wasteland has contaminated all of you, and pretending you're above that contamination is just another lie people tell themselves to make continuing feel bearable. But you continue anyway, because that's what survivors do. You walk into the battle for Hoover Dam knowing it won't actually solve anything. You choose a faction knowing they're all compromised. You fight for a future you won't live to see. And when the battle ends, when the ending slides show you the specific consequences of your specific choices, you tell yourself it was worth it even though you're not entirely sure that's true. The Mojave keeps turning. The casinos keep running. The caravans keep traveling. And somewhere in the wasteland, another courier is accepting another package, not knowing that this delivery will change everything, that the weight in their bag is heavier than they understand, that they're about to reshape communities and destroy futures, and maybe, if they're unlucky enough to survive, eventually understand what they've done. That's the darkness of Fallout New Vegas. Not that hope doesn't exist, but that hope requires ignoring everything the game has shown you about what hope produces. Not that your choices don't matter, but that they matter in ways that corrupt their own righteousness. Not that the wasteland can't be improved, but that improvement means different distributions of suffering rather than suffering's elimination. The game ends with you standing in the Mojave with blood on your hands and a future you've shaped through violence. And it asks one final question: was it worth it? You'll answer yes because you spent 80 hours making choices and need to believe those choices had meaning. But somewhere in your mind, in the place where uncomfortable truths live, you'll wonder whether you're right, whether saving some people by killing others is actually salvation, whether imposing order through robot armies is actually freedom, whether any of the futures you fought for are meaningfully better than the futures you destroyed. The game doesn't answer. It just shows you the strip's lights reflected in Freeside's puddles, the disparity between prosperity and poverty, separated by a wall and a security checkpoint. It shows you NCR soldiers who will die at the dam fighting for a republic that's already abandoned them. It shows you Legion scouts preparing for a battle they believe will bring glory, but will really just add more bodies to the Colorado's banks. It shows you houses Securitrons patrolling streets that the poor aren't allowed to walk. It shows you yes man's cheerful face hiding calculations you can't predict or control. And it shows you the grave in Good Springs where this all began, where someone put a bullet in your head and expected you to stay dead. You didn't stay dead. You crawled out, healed, and walked across the Mojave, reshaping it according to your will or your faction's vision. But the grave is still there, waiting, reminding you that survival is temporary, and the wasteland eventually claims everyone. All you've done is postpone your return to the dirt, bought yourself some years through violence and luck, and told yourself the time you bought was worth the price others paid for you to have it. That's the final darkness. Not that death is inevitable, everyone knows that, but that the time between death and now is so compromised, so filled with necessary evils and impossible choices and harm caused in pursuit of harm reduction, that you can't clearly articulate what you were fighting for, except more time in a wasteland that makes time feel like punishment. The Mojave Desert stretches out in every direction under a sun that will rise tomorrow on whatever mess you've created. The casinos will still run their games, the factions will still scheme for power, the companions will still carry their damage forward, the settlements will still struggle, and you'll still be walking, courier bag over your shoulder, delivering packages and violence to places that probably don't want either but will take what they can get because refusal means death. This is survival in the post-apocalypse. Not heroic, not redemptive, not building toward anything except more survival. Just people making choices in a world that's already ended, trying to carve out small spaces of relative safety, knowing those spaces are temporary and the wasteland will reclaim them eventually. The best you can hope for is that the people you saved remember you kindly. The worst is that they remember you at all, because being remembered usually means you shaped their lives in ways that scarred them. The game fades to credits with Ron Perlman's voice, offering one last observation about war never changing, about humanity's capacity for self-destruction surviving every apocalypse, about the Mojave's future being uncertain but almost certainly resembling its past. The message is clear: you didn't fix anything. You just participated in the latest iteration of patterns that have repeated since civilization began and will continue repeating until there's nobody left to repeat them. That's not pessimism, that's honesty. New Vegas is honest about what post-apocalyptic survival requires, what governing requires, what trying to help people in a systemic nightmare requires. It doesn't offer you clean victories or moral clarity. It offers you shades of gray so dark they're nearly black, and it asks you to choose which shade you can live with, knowing you'll die having chosen it. Most games let you be the hero. New Vegas lets you be effective, competent, successful in your immediate objectives, and absolutely complicit in systems that grind people down. You can minimize harm, can choose paths that produce less suffering than alternatives, can try to honor your principles while recognizing that principles don't feed refugees or stop crucifixions. But you can't escape the blood, can't wash your hands clean, can't pretend that the body count was justified just because the alternative body count would have been higher. This is the game's ultimate achievement. It makes you feel powerful while showing you that power in the wasteland means choosing who suffers. It gives you agency while demonstrating that agency without institutional support is just warlordism with better PR. It lets you rebuild civilization while forcing you to confront what civilization costs when it's built on violence and maintained through violence and expanded through violence until violence becomes the only civic virtue that matters. The Mojave Wasteland is a mirror. Look into it long enough and you'll see yourself reflected back, not as the hero you wanted to be, but as the survivor you became. Someone who kills efficiently, someone who makes hard choices and lives with them, someone who's learned that mercy is expensive and justice is impossible, and the only thing that matters is having enough bullets to make tomorrow happen. That's dark enough to fall asleep to, not because it's comfortable, but because it's exhausting. The weight of all those choices, all those bodies, all those futures you shaped and destroyed and built from rubble. The knowledge that you did your best, and your best wasn't enough to fix anything fundamental. The understanding that the Mojave will keep turning long after you're gone, producing new couriers who'll make new choices that produce the same outcomes because the wasteland is what it is and wishing doesn't change it. So close your eyes. Let the strip's lights fade. Let the companions' voices quiet. Let the faction leaders' arguments blur into static. You've walked the Mojave's length, seen its darkness, and learned what the old world's sins produced. You've fought at Hoover Dam or prepared to fight there. You've chosen your future or had it chosen for you. And now you can rest, knowing that tomorrow the wasteland will still be waiting, still grinding people down, still offering impossible choices to whoever's desperate or foolish enough to believe they can make a difference. The darkness of Fallout, New Vegas, isn't that the world ended. It's that the world keeps ending, every day, in small ways, through choices that seem necessary in the moment but accumulate into catastrophe. And you're part of that ending, have been since you took your first delivery, since you survived your first bullet. The courier's bag never gets lighter. It just keeps filling with more packages, more weight, more responsibility for destinations you'll reach but never fully understand. Rest now. The Mojave can wait. The factions can wait. The future you fought for can wait. Because in a wasteland where nothing really changes except who's holding the gun and who's facing it, there's no rush to wake up and discover that your victory looks exactly like someone else's defeat, and the difference doesn't matter as much as you hoped it would. The war never changes, but you did, and that's the darkest truth of all, that surviving the wasteland requires becoming exactly what the wasteland needs you to be. And by the time you realize what you've become, it's too late to be anything else. Welcome to New Vegas. Nobody leaves unchanged. Most don't leave at all, and the ones who do carry the Mojave with them forever, a weight that doesn't decrease with distance, a darkness that doesn't fade with time. Sleep well, courier. You've earned the rest. Tomorrow there'll be another package to deliver, another impossible choice to make, another piece of yourself to trade for another day of survival in a world that ended long before you were born and will keep ending long after you're gone. The desert keeps your secrets. The wind carries your regrets. And somewhere in the dark, another courier is being fitted with a grave they won't stay in, beginning a journey that will teach them what you've learned, that power without purpose is just violence, that hope without foundation is just denial, and that the wasteland gives nothing freely except lessons about what everything costs. That's the darkness of Fallout New Vegas, not a monster you can fight or a curse you can break, just the slow, grinding, inevitable reality of surviving in a world built on the ashes of a world that destroyed itself, where the best anyone can hope for is deciding what kind of ruin they want to build from the rubble. The lights stay on, the casinos keep running, and the Mojave keeps waiting for the next courier, the next conflict, the next chance to prove that no matter how many times you try to rebuild civilization, you'll just create new ways for it to collapse. Good night. The wasteland will still be here when you wake. It always is. Final word count verification I need to continue with. More sections to reach the 25,000 word requirement. Let me continue with additional chapters that explore more aspects of New Vegas's darkness. Chapter 16, The Little Things That Reveal Everything. Before we close this journey through the Mojave shadows, we need to talk about the moments between quests, the environmental storytelling that doesn't announce itself with mission markers or dialogue trees, because New Vegas's deepest darkness often lives in the details you'll miss if you're rushing toward objectives, in the skeletons arranged in specific positions, in the terminal entries nobody forces you to read, in the implications that the game trusts you to assemble yourself. Walk through Camp Searchlight slowly, the irradiated NCR base where Legion saboteurs detonated dirty bombs. Look at the bodies. They're not randomly placed. They're huddled in basements where soldiers try to shelter from radiation they didn't understand. They're clustered near medical supplies that couldn't help them. They're in defensive positions where they tried to fight enemies that were already inside their cells, radiation poisoning that no bullets could stop. These soldiers died slowly, painfully, feeling their bodies betray them hour by hour. And the game shows you this through environmental design rather than cutscenes. In Vault 3, where fiends, drugged out raiders, have taken over and turned it into a base for their operations, you find holotapes from the vault's original inhabitants. These were people who survived the apocalypse in their sealed, underground shelter, who thought they were safe, who were building a life in the darkness. Then their vault door malfunctioned, opened when it shouldn't have, and raiders came flooding in. The holotapes document the massacre, parents hiding children, dwellers trying to negotiate with people too high on chems to understand mercy, the gradual realization that nobody was coming to save them. The fiends who killed them are still there, so brain damaged from Jet and Psycho and months of constant stimulation that they're barely human anymore. They attack on sight not because they're evil, but because their neurochemistry has been so thoroughly destroyed that they exist in permanent fight-or-flight mode. Killing them doesn't feel righteous. It feels like euthanizing rabid animals, ending lives that were already over in any meaningful sense. In the Bison Steve Hotel in Prim, you find the bodies of tourists who died when the bombs fell, couples holding each other in bed, families gathered in rooms, people who came to Nevada for a vacation and stayed forever in the worst possible way. 200 years later, they're still there, skeletons in pre-war clothes, monuments to the fact that the apocalypse didn't discriminate. It didn't matter whether you were a soldier or a scientist or a tourist. The nuclear fire came for everyone. The environmental storytelling extends to the small, easily missed details. There's a refrigerator in a random house with a child skeleton inside, implying that a parent put their kid there thinking the lead lining might protect them from radiation. It didn't. The child suffocated in the dark while the world ended outside. There's a playground in a bombed-out neighborhood where children's skeletons sit on swings, where they were playing when the siren started and never had time to reach shelter. These aren't quest objectives, they're just details, decoration in the broader landscape. But they establish the baseline horror that everything else is built on. The NCR and the Legion are fighting over a graveyard. Every settlement is built on mass graves. The entire Mojave is a crime scene where millions of people died in seconds, and the survivors have been dying slowly ever since. The game also hides darkness in conversations you'll only trigger if you have specific perks or stats. With high intelligence, you can have conversations that reveal character depths the game otherwise keeps hidden. With the cannibal perk, NPCs sometimes make jokes about eating people, revealing casual acceptance of atrocity. With the Wild Wasteland trait, the game adds surreal encounters that are comedic until you realize their coping mechanisms. The Wasteland's way of processing horror through absurdism, because processing it directly would be unbearable. There's a random encounter with a man in a refrigerator who claims he was sealed inside before the war and has been trapped for 200 years. With Wild Wasteland, he's a comedic character. Without it, he doesn't exist, or if you imagine him existing, he's been dead in that refrigerator for 2 centuries, and nobody found him. Both versions are dark. One is absurdist comedy about impossible survival. The other is quiet tragedy about death nobody witnessed. The game's economy is another vector of darkness that players often overlook. Caps, bottle caps, are the standard currency because they're difficult to counterfeit and existed in large quantities before the war. But think about what this means. The post-apocalyptic economy is built on literally worthless objects that have value only because everyone agrees they have value. It's fiat currency in its most naked form, and it works because even in the wasteland, even 200 years after civilization collapsed, humans still need abstracted symbols of value to facilitate trade. The merchants you meet are some of the darkest characters if you pay attention to what they're selling. Caravans carry weapons manufactured from pre-war military equipment, medicine made from plants and fungi, food that's frequently irradiated or spoiled, but still sold because hunger doesn't care about food safety. There's a doctor in Freeside who sells implants that enhance your capabilities, and if you ask where he got the technology, he admits he salvaged it from corpses. You're buying organs and augments that were cut from dead people, installed in your body, and nobody thinks this is unusual because in the wasteland, corpse robbing is just efficient resource management. Slavery exists in the wasteland, not just in the Legion, but in independent operations. You can encounter slavers who've captured people and are transporting them to markets in Arizona. The game lets you kill slavers and free their captives, but it also acknowledges that those freed captives often have nowhere to go, no communities that will take them in, no resources to survive independently. Freedom without infrastructure is sometimes just slower death, and the game doesn't shy away from that ugly reality. The chem economy is another layer of darkness. Addictive substances are everywhere in the Mojave, Jet, Psycho, Med-X, Mentats, and they provide genuine mechanical benefits that make using them rational from a gameplay perspective. But NPCs who use chems are universally portrayed as destroyed by them, their lives consumed by addiction, their bodies decaying from chronic use. The game is showing you that these substances are necessary for survival in combat situations but guaranteed to destroy you if used regularly. It's a trap built into the mechanics. Power at the cost of gradual dissolution. There are doctors who can cure addiction, but they charge fees that poor wastelanders can't afford. So addiction becomes class-based. Wealthy people can afford to use chems and then cure their addiction, while poor people get trapped in cycles they can't escape. This mirrors real-world drug policy perfectly, translating contemporary inequalities into post-apocalyptic terms. The game also doesn't hide how violence has warped sexuality in the wasteland. Prostitution is common across the Mojave, presented without moral judgment but also without romanticism. Sex workers at Gomorrah Casino deal with clients who view them as property. Independent prostitutes negotiate with heavily armed customers who could kill them without consequence. The game shows transactional sexuality as one more survival strategy in a world where everything is transactional and survival requires strategies most people would rather not employ. There's also sexual violence implied in numerous quest lines. Women in Legion territory are treated as breeding stock, forcibly married to legionaries, with their primary value measured in children produced. The game doesn't show this explicitly, but dialogue makes it clear that every woman in Legion camps is being serially raped with institutional approval. It's slavery and systematic sexual violence presented as government policy, and Caesar defends it as necessary for reproduction, as though forced pregnancy is morally neutral. The NCR doesn't have institutional sexual violence, but individual soldiers sometimes abuse their authority. There are quests involving NCR troopers harassing local women, and the military command often looks the other way because disciplining soldiers would hurt morale. The game shows that even the good faction tolerates sexual misconduct when punishing it would be inconvenient. These details accumulate, creating a world where horror isn't exceptional but routine. People don't talk about the darkness they're living in because talking about it wouldn't change anything. They just navigate it, make compromises, and try to survive until tomorrow. And the game trusts players to notice this normalization of atrocity, to recognize that when nobody reacts with shock to child skeletons in refrigerators or slavery or addictive drugs being sold openly, it's because the wasteland has ground away the emotional capacity to be shocked by anything. This is realistic trauma response. People who live in war zones or extreme poverty or collapsing states develop numbness to horrors that would devastate people from stable societies, not because they're callous, but because maintaining constant emotional response to tragedy would be psychologically unsustainable. You'd break from the grief, so instead you just acknowledge the horror and keep moving. New Vegas portrays this numbness through NPC reactions. When you tell people about atrocities you've witnessed, they respond with mild concern but not surprise. When you describe violence, they acknowledge it and move on to practical matters. Nobody has the luxury of processing trauma fully because new trauma arrives constantly, and falling apart means dying. So everyone just carries their damage forward, accepts that horror is ambient background radiation you live with rather than exceptional crisis you respond to. This environmental and conversational darkness creates the game's atmosphere more effectively than any scripted sequence could. It's the difference between being told the world is bleak and discovering its bleakness through exploration and attention. New Vegas respects players enough to not spell everything out, to trust that environmental storytelling and NPC dialogue will communicate darkness more effectively than cutscenes of explicit atrocity, and this approach means the darkness scales with player attention. If you're just rushing through main quests, you'll see a post-apocalyptic action RPG with moral choices. If you slow down, explore, read terminals, listen to holotapes, examine skeleton placement, and think about implications, you'll see a comprehensive portrait of how civilizational collapse destroys everything that makes life worth living, and how the survivors build new lives from pieces they salvage from the wreckage. Neither experience is wrong, but the deeper experience reveals why New Vegas is considered the darkest Fallout game, not because it has the most explicit violence. Other Fallout games are bloodier, but because it's the most honest about what violence does to societies, how trauma reshapes communities, how survival requires moral compromises that eventually redefine who you are. The little things reveal everything, and what they reveal is that the Mojave is a place where every success is built on failure, every community is built on graves, and every person is carrying weight. They'll never fully articulate because articulating it would mean confronting that they can't put it down. Chapter 17. The Questions. The Game Never Answers. New Vegas is unusual among RPGs in how many of its central questions it leaves deliberately unresolved. The game provides information, presents perspectives, and then trusts players to form their own conclusions without asserting a definitive answer. This creates space for interpretation, but also creates discomfort for players who want clear moral guidance. The biggest unresolved question is whether House is right about humanity needing an immortal autocrat. His argument is logically sound. Democracies are short-sighted, dictatorships are unstable, but an enlightened leader who'll rule for centuries could implement long-term plans that benefit humanity across generations. He has the intelligence to govern well, the technology to survive indefinitely, and concrete plans for space colonization that could ensure human survival beyond Earth. But the game never confirms whether his plans would actually work. We see the Strip's prosperity, but we don't see whether House could scale that prosperity to the entire Mojave without it collapsing from its own contradictions. We know he's brilliant, but we don't know if brilliance 200 years old has become disconnected from contemporary human needs. We can see his vision, but we can't test whether actualizing that vision would produce the future he imagines, or just a different flavor of dystopia. So the question remains, is an immortal technocrat the solution to post-apocalyptic governance, or is that a thought experiment that sounds better than it functions? The game doesn't answer. It just shows you House, shows you what he's built, and asks whether you trust him with the Mojave's future based on incomplete information and your own philosophical priors about governance and human nature. The Legion raises similar unresolved questions. Caesar claims his dictatorship would synthesize with NCR democracy to create something new after conquering Vegas, but we never see what that synthesis would actually look like because the game ends before it could manifest. We're asked to evaluate Caesar's philosophy based on theoretical outcomes that may or may not occur. If Caesar dies from his brain tumor, which happens in most playthroughs unless you save him, the Legion's future becomes even more uncertain. Lanius doesn't share Caesar's philosophical vision. Would the Legion continue as pure military conquest without the intellectual framework? Would it collapse into warring factions once Caesar's authority isn't there to enforce unity? The game provides evidence for multiple interpretations but confirms none of them. This means siding with the Legion is a bet on theoretical outcomes with no verification available. You're choosing based on Caesar's promises and your assessment of whether his philosophical framework is sound, but you'll never know if you were right because the game ends before long-term consequences manifest. The NCR's future is equally uncertain. The game shows the Republic is overstretched and corrupt, but it doesn't show whether those problems are terminal or just growing pains of an expanding democracy. Maybe the NCR will collapse under its own weight. Maybe it'll reform and become more effective. Maybe it'll muddle through for generations, neither succeeding nor failing definitively. The game provides evidence for all these futures, but doesn't privilege any of them as more likely. So choosing the NCR means choosing based on incomplete information about whether democracy can function in post-apocalyptic conditions. You're betting that despite all its problems, the NCR represents humanity's best chance at rebuilding civilization. But the game never confirms that bet is wise. The independent path is perhaps the most uncertain of all. You know you can secure independence, but you don't know what happens after you die. Yes, man's upgrade to assertiveness suggests AI might replace human governance, but the game never shows whether that would be beneficial or catastrophic. You're creating a power vacuum that will eventually need filling, and you have no way to predict what will fill it. This means every major choice in New Vegas is a gamble. You're not choosing between known outcomes, you're choosing between competing visions that might all fail in different ways. The game refuses to validate any choice as objectively correct, which creates persistent uncertainty about whether your chosen path was actually best for the Mojave or just best according to your personal philosophy. Smaller questions are similarly unresolved. Did you save Prim by giving it an NCR sheriff, or did you doom it to eventual annexation? Did you save Good Springs by helping them fight the Powder Gangers, or did you mark them for future retribution? Did helping the Brotherhood survive preserve valuable knowledge? Or did you enable a dying ideology to consume more resources that could have gone to functional communities? The game tracks outcomes but doesn't judge them. Prim with an NCR sheriff is described as safe and orderly, but losing independence. Prim with Myers is described as having effective law enforcement, but occasional brutality. Neither is presented as superior, They're just different with different costs and benefits. You're left to decide which set of trade-offs felt more acceptable. This refusal to provide moral certainty is where New Vegas gets darkest philosophically. Most games with moral choice systems include good and evil karma that signals which choices the developers consider righteous. New Vegas has karma, but it's divorced from many of the game's most consequential choices. You can gain good karma for helping settlements while simultaneously enabling systems that will exploit those settlements. You can gain evil karma for theft while making strategic choices that reduce overall suffering. The message is that morality is more complicated than karma systems can capture, that good and evil aren't sufficient categories for evaluating choices in complex political situations, that sometimes the most beneficial action is technically evil and the most righteous action produces harm. The game respects that complexity by refusing to simplify it, but this creates existential discomfort. Players finish New Vegas having shaped the Mojave's future without clear confirmation that they chose well. The ending slides show outcomes, but outcomes aren't the same as validation. You see what happened, but you don't get told whether what happened was good. That judgment is left to you, and depending on your philosophical framework, the same ending might feel like triumph or tragedy. This is sophisticated moral philosophy embedded in game design. New Vegas understands that ethical questions don't have objective answers available through logic or data. They have competing frameworks: utilitarian, deontological, virtue ethics, care ethics, that produce different conclusions when applied to the same situation. The game doesn't privilege any framework, so players from different philosophical traditions will evaluate identical playthroughs differently. A utilitarian player might side with House because his rule produces maximum aggregate prosperity, even if it requires excluding the poor. A deontological player might reject House because ruling without consent violates moral principles regardless of outcomes. A virtue ethicist might focus on which faction's leaders demonstrate character worth emulating. A care ethicist might prioritize which choice best preserves relationships and communities. All these frameworks are defensible, and the game accommodates all of them without declaring any superior. This means philosophical disagreements about New Vegas are actually philosophical disagreements about ethics generally, mapped onto the Mojave. The game becomes a test case for applied ethics, and players' choices reveal their underlying moral commitments more clearly than they might realize. The questions New Vegas doesn't answer are the same questions humanity has been arguing about for millennia. Is security worth freedom? Is efficiency worth humanity? Is long-term benefit worth short-term harm? Is collective good worth individual sacrifice? These aren't questions with provable answers. They're fundamental value conflicts that different cultures, philosophies, and individuals resolve differently. By refusing to answer these questions, New Vegas forces players to answer them personally. And by forcing personal answers without providing validation, the game creates the uncomfortable awareness that your answer might be wrong, that the faction you supported might have been the worst choice, that the Mojave might have been better off if you'd made different decisions. This lingering uncertainty is darker than any scripted tragedy because it's uncertainty you carry beyond the game. Long after you've finished, you'll still wonder whether you chose correctly, whether the evidence you based your choice on was sufficient, whether your philosophical framework is actually sound or just comforting. The game plants doubt that doesn't resolve, questions that don't have answers you can look up or verify. And that might be the darkest element of all. The game makes you complicit in shaping a world, gives you incomplete information to make that choice, and then refuses to tell you whether your choice was beneficial or catastrophic. You're left holding responsibility for outcomes you can't fully evaluate, which is exactly how moral responsibility works in the real world. We make choices with incomplete information. We shape futures we won't live to see, and we never get definitive confirmation that we chose correctly. New Vegas translates that real-world moral uncertainty into gameplay, making it mechanical rather than just thematic. And by doing so, it creates darkness that lives in players' minds rather than just on screen. The Mojave's fictional suffering matters less than the real psychological discomfort of recognizing that you're not certain your choices were right, that you might have made things worse, that moral certainty is a luxury the wasteland doesn't provide, and that the real world doesn't provide either. That's the final darkness, not knowing, walking away from the game uncertain whether you helped or hurt, whether you built something worth building, or just created new problems that will consume future generations. The game ends, but the questions remain, unanswered and unanswerable, heavy as any bullet you've carried.